ready to go.
We have two items that we first do first, which is approval of minutes from a couple of meetings.
Second.
All right, they've been approved.
It was easy.
I know, got the easy part first, that's right.
Amen. Ditto.
I'm gonna bring you up later.
You ready?
So hopefully we can move through this fairly rapidly, or fairly straightforward. Now, I have one question about the library new building, but we haven't seen anything.
You will see things tonight.
Uh,
Yep,
That's-
you will see things tonight. They had a joint meeting of the building committee and the library trustees. I want to say last week, where they got the report back from the architect and cost estimates. There's still going to be a lot of things changing, but they have those materials tonight to speak to them. Yes.
And there's no budgetary impact this year or next year, 2024,
Operating budget.
operating budget, right?
Yeah, but we have to, they will be submitting a warrant,
Yes.
so that's.
And that will be discussed tonight. Yeah, materials will be distributed and will be discussed.
No decisions will be made for those later.
We want to follow up on the colas. You see,
I did do it.
inflation.
I've been digging around and then they do have statistics in the budget office relative to energy inflation and food inflation. And what we find is that from the 21 to fiscal 22 to fiscal 23, it's not a huge increase, but if you go back to fiscal 21, it's been very significant. So, you know, I think we're feeling it. I know. The energy and so I think we want to, before final decisions made on, see what she.
Yeah, so I was looking at it more and actually it's reversed. So the food and energy's gone down recently.
Well, that's what they say.
But well, I hope that. The ones that we're using, which is the Northeast, and those do include those other, the cost of food. And energy. And so I did look at that, and I can show you. In fact, when you go to the, they go through and they point you actually to the town of Barrington, the Newton, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine area. And I thought that was interesting because I don't know that we're that much different from a lot of Massachusetts. Right? We have a lot of Massachusetts residents coming in, our housing values have gone up. Right? So I actually might suggest that that's actually the best measure. I know we include New England and what is it, Northeast? The Northeast goes down to New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and things.
So that third one down, the consumer price index Boston, that's the Boston Cambridge Newton data point.
Right.
So, and you can see they don't do that one monthly, they do that one bi-monthly. But in the last 12 months, that CPI is 1.87%.
But when you do the calculation, you're using all three, right?
Yeah, what this does is it takes the Northeast, the New England, and so this is zooming in each of the three, Northeast, New England, Boston, and averages it with the Social Security cost of living. And that's the 2.49% is an average of those four, the three CPI over the last 12 months and the singular Social Security.
All I would say is that the Northeast and New England probably aren't reflective of us, and I know we don't necessarily need to change it this year. I would suggest we look at that and just,
Yep.
And when you look at BLS, they clearly say that is the one that's most active for our area. It makes sense to me. It may not have made sense 5 years ago, but today it does seem right. So
Is that percent increase based on from the previous month or the previous year?
So this is 12-month look back from September 2022 through August of 2023.
Thank you.
Yep. And so the point in doing that time frame is that our pay plan was updated through the wage study last year in September of 2022. So that is when our pay plan was most current. And so, you know, if we make changes now, then we would start the look back to whenever we made changes to the pay plan.
But there's another thing on this. So almost everybody gets a step increase, right?
Right.
And that's yearly.
Yes.
So that's 2.5%.
Right.
And then on top of that, we're talking about a COLA.
Right.
So that's 5%. So I don't think we're, you know, I think that that's a pretty good increase, plus
But then-
9.5% between.
Well, there are two different purposes there. One is paying for longevity and
The
that
merit.
step is recognizing increased productivity and all and efficiency that people do. So that one is all quasi merit kind of thing.
There's no merit in there.
Well, it does, that's the theory behind.
No,
Yeah. And
I,
then you have the COLA, which is really just recognizing the cost of living.
but I think most companies, when they do this, they do COLA yearly, and then there's a 9%, 7% is often what I saw increase when you get a promotion, right? So otherwise, it's COLAs between them.
Well,
Now,
that's-
here, what we do is we give them
promotion.
COLAs,
It's in place, that's what the step.
but they're getting the step increases, and then I think it's at 9.5% to go from one grade to another. Right, so they're getting 9.5% for that promotion, if you will, but then they're getting 5% each year for COLAs and whatever, which just seems like a lot of money. My experience is from corporate life or most anywhere.
Corporate.
Yeah, I know. But just
We
saying,
know that, I know, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And there are some private corporations where they really don't get steps. It's all merit-based and performance-based evaluations. But
okay,
here, it's if you meet the standard performance characteristics, you get a step.
So we doing old business, see,
Well, that's where it started, yeah.
a couple of topics.
Okay.
So I would like to talk about Richardson Dam. And is it true, I'm asking Connor and Dan, that we're waiting on the board to decide whether we're talking about removal or repair? And if that's where we're at, it's extremely hard to evaluate, at least in my mind, it's hard to evaluate money for whatever the purpose is, without knowing what the purpose is. And I'm sure if John were here, he would be echoing the same thing, where, is it true CMA has no direction yet because we have to decide what direction to do? Wouldn't it be appropriate to have them investigate and put a price or at least an estimate on both? So that we can then evaluate $200,000 for conservation? For what?
Excellent question. So that work has been done. The engineering firm that did the preliminary evaluation said it's going to cost about the same to reconstruct it or remove it. The problem is,
And what number is that?
at the time, that was about $200,000, but that was.
So they want the town to pay the whole, conservation wants the town to pay the whole thing.
That was 3 years ago. Our estimate right now is $300,000 for either. But the problem is with evaluating the options between the two is the permitting costs. So Richardson Pond is a prime wetland. That dam created an enormous prime wetland. Current DES permitting requirements make you pay tremendous impact fees for disturbing a prime wetland. And so my position and the position of the DES employee in the Dam Bureau is that it's not wetland impact, removing a dam, it's wetland restoration, right? You're returning it to its natural state. We have been trying desperately, both the Dam Bureau and myself, to get the Wetlands Bureau of DES to make a determination on if removing that dam would be wetland impact or wetland restoration. Thank you. And so that is the piece of that's a missing link for having, I would say, enough information for the board to make a decision whether to reconstruct or remove. I think there's not a lot of interest, and I'm in the company of somebody that maybe has the most interest, but I don't think there's a lot of interest in removal from the stakeholders being Southeast Land Trust, Conservation Commission, the Dam Bureau, the Select Board. but everybody wants to make sure that we can look taxpayers in the face and say that we evaluated all of the options, including removal, which of course would have no long-term costs or smaller long-term costs.
Right, but once we know that, then we can figure out what percentage the town's paying versus this conservation.
And so the select board has had preliminary discussions with the Conservation Commission last year when Dannon was chair. And the select board was open to a cost share. No decision was made. The makeup of the board isn't dramatically different. And so, but that decision will have to be made, what that cost share, if there's a cost share, what it will be, and obviously what direction to go. And I think the tough part is we're counting on having enough information for the board to make a decision by the time we finalize the warrant, because we need to get going on this project. We have a letter of deficiency from the state that says you need to address these problems. But we are concurrently gathering that information.
Personally, there's no way I'm gonna support anything, not even $1, unless I know what the total amount is. And I think the Conservation Commission should certainly be stepping forward with the bulk of what's going on. They get 75% of the land use change tax. Having them pay, and this is Amy's idea, give her credit, I like it. It would be a compromise I could live with if they paid 75% of whatever it costs to fix the dam.
I'd like to get a cost estimate of if we keep the dam down the road, what's it gonna cost? What are our maintenance costs down the road? If we take it down, we know there's zero. But if we replace it or do work to it, that it stays, what are we looking at down the road, 10, 20, 30 years down the road for maintenance? Do we need to put money aside for that? And also with that, if the sense is to keep it because it provides recreational benefit for the town. And I'm not familiar with it, but I thought that was the, people go there, it's
Farmer Trail.
trails or something. If that's the case, what's the impact? Are there enough people that are using it that will say, yeah, we want to keep it? Or, just off the top of my head, my feeling is take the thing down, put it back the way it was. There was no dam there. It was a flowing stream, brook or river. We don't pay the long-term costs down the road, but I don't know what the value to the community is to leave it and restore it if there's recreational value with that piece of property.
And related to that,
So that's my,
if you let it go back to natural, and have a trail that goes there, supposedly goes across the dam. Well, was there an alternate to that prior to the dam coming in? So that you can still have recreational and you should look at wetlands instead of the lake.
so I'd like to see that addressed in some of the discussions down the road in terms of what are we doing with it? Does it stay? Does it go? But let's look down the road and what's the value to the town, the community now by restoring it? So, and I don't know if that's a study by
I
somebody.
think we need to go back to the land use committee. I think in the town talked about, it. They really like the idea of having this conservation area. So I think the wetlands there does provide some value. So I think it's probably going to be hard to really judge.
This is a pretty popular trail. I think when it's not
Fish,
yeah, pretty broad like now.
It goes forever. I had no idea.
Well, and it was expanded also to connect over to Ross Road with 3 years ago, an acquisition of additional conservation property. Mr. Irving, the piece of information that's available right now to answer one of your questions is the plan would be to reconstruct the dam at a non-jurisdictional elevation. So the water level would remain the same, but they measure a dam from the highest point of the earthen part of the dam to the lowest point of the outfall. And the dam can be reconstructed, and 6 feet is jurisdictional. The dam right now is like 6 feet 4 inches. And so it being a non-jurisdictional dam doesn't eliminate all of the future maintenance costs, but dramatically decreases the maintenance costs due to oversight and inspections and remediation.
So non-jurisdictional, then the state's not involved? Is that
Correct.
the point? Okay.
State's still involved from the Wetlands Bureau, but not the Dam Bureau, which is the, annual inspections and, hey, you need to.
Now, liability to the town, should we do nothing?
Very low. It's a low hazard dam classification, and the inundation map doesn't even project the loss of structures. So it's Malago Brook, it flows through under the Malago Bridge, which we just upsized. When that culvert over Malago Road was there, that was likely a piece of infrastructure that would be lost. But with the bridge that we have now, that has the capacity to handle even a breach of the dam.
That would be part of the decision to say we're gonna come in and finance a lot. That's not there.
I think there was a broader question that Matt was having defined estimates for whatever goes forward on a warrant article. And we talked about this last year and we agreed that there needs to be some definition. It can't be easy. And the question is, do we still go forward with that this year, with that concept? I personally like it.
I think, yeah, I'm kind of consistent with what Peter said. I hate to put anything. It's really opinion on.
Yeah, and I guess I won't speak for the board, but from my perspective, if that information wasn't available, I don't think the warrant article would go forward, right? I think it's a placeholder because we anticipate enough information will be available to move the project forward, right? We start 5 months ahead of finalizing the warrant. And so that is, the anticipation is that enough information will be available to answer most of those questions. And if it isn't, I don't think the select board will support moving forward either. But maybe the message that can come from the budget committee to the select board is if these pieces of information, which Amy has collected notes on, aren't available, the budget committee isn't going to support moving forward at all. And even if that information is available, the budget committee sounds skeptical of the town, a heavier weight of the town's responsibility for funding, the town being from a warrant article versus the conservation.
Well, that's my personal opinion.
It sounded like that was
We
actually.
really
I
have
don't
a
know.
voting.
Discussion, yeah.
Yeah, it's a discussion.
Two separate issues.
Yeah.
Right.
But I look at it as, it's not a two-part question, it should be a three-part question. Take it down. Or not take it down. Or rebuild it. Or do nothing.
We can't do nothing
Why?
because we have a letter deficiency from the dam bureau of the state.
I said, what's the liability if we do nothing?
Oh, I thought you meant if the dam is breached. I apologize. I misunderstood that question. Yeah, so we have a letter of deficiency from the state that says you need to take these
Right.
tasks.
Okay.
Their recourse is twofold. One, they can find the town. Two, they can come in and do the work, which is unlikely with a low hazard dam, and build a town. And so they would sanction the town in some way, if we
I would
didn't
like to see
cooperate.
that as part of the estimate for us to make a decision. Because if the worst risk is $1,000, fine, I'll take the fine. If it's larger, then we have to
But if
consider
it's
for
just a
$200,000.
Or is it a fine? Let's read the. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure
That's
it's
what
not
I'd
just.
like to know.
So to be revisited, once more information is available, and if more information isn't available, then the budget committee will take a vote on saying, hey, no.
Sounds, thank you. Sure. Okay, let's move on, and we have guests here. We have to respect their time. Town clerk. It's your turn.
Well, any questions?
All right.
Great way to start.
So I'm just gonna read one if that's okay. So it was you'll like this. It was the one about it's on here, the printing, the copier, lease maintenance. It says that the service contract is for the entire town hall and it's split between the department. But I think there's also budgets for that on each town department. So is there double counting?
No, we have one bill and each department pays their own.
Yeah, there's two components. So we have a negotiated contract with Seacoast Business Machines, which is now Ubio, which gives us a certain volume of color and black and white copies townwide. And so that is a base contract fee. That contract covers all of the toner, parts, service, for all the machines under that contract. The second component is overages. So if and when there are overages, those are paid by machine
Okay.
within a department.
I just want to make sure it wasn't double.
No, it's a good question. I guess there's a third component, and town clerk is one that's subject to this, is we lease purchase. The copier in the town clerk's office. And so that's a separate cost. That copier lease maintenance, that's the 4443.
Another question? No one else does, all right. 4754, the equipment. Says if you had to replace your printers, towers, laptops, everyday items in the office need to run 3 swipes for credit card processing. But that probably, the way that's written, it suggests if the worst case were to happen, this is what it would cost.
Yeah.
But is that realistic or?
I have no idea. They are, I got the DMV printers just 3-ish years ago. And I've been told the life of the printers are only 3 to 5 years. Previously, we had one from the state that was a workhorse that we had forever, but they were not being serviced and nobody else would service them. So we had to get, I can't function without the printers. I can't have us share printers when we're processing. I just want to kind of have it covered rather than, unless you want me to use the contingency if I need it. That's all we're gonna have it in there.
It just, I noticed it because it was 2,200 this year estimate, then 9,300 next year. So-
No, you're looking at election. You're not looking.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's the other.
Yeah,
one.
'cause-
You're right. Okay.
Yeah, it's,
And the election equipment is obviously the
Yeah.
additional poll pass, right?
Yeah.
4 elections versus 1.
Questions on? Operating budget itself? Go ahead. I'm gonna then go to the election.
Okay. Have you personally investigated other voting machines? Since our AccuFund machines
No.
are on Death Store?
Give a quick update, Kim.
no, so it has been certified. I don't know if you're aware that the Dominion went through LHS, which is how we have our poll pads and our current AccuVote machines.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
They are certified. They are certified.
The state
and-
certified new machines.
Correct.
Right.
And they're certified, I think, as of March 1st or something, but, so it's in my budget to request them. But I don't know, they keep saying they don't think there's gonna be grant money, but I don't know if you wanna wait the year, because the next year is such a pivotal year, and I'm asking for the extra money for the poll pads. Probably the following year would be the better time, probably to put in for them, but it's not inexpensive, because I need to replace the ones, and it has to be all or nothing, you can't have 1 old and 2 new, and we'll make sure on that.
On that topic, lobby all of your state representatives for funding for ballot counting devices. The state has money available. The state has cash on hand that they could fully fund all of the ballot counting devices across the state, and there would be consistency. They could do that easily. And they made a lot of progress this last legislative cycle in getting that done, but they didn't get across the finish line. The funding source, the most reasonable funding source is actually under the control of Secretary of State. And so the legislature doesn't have direct control of it, but they kind of have indirect purse string control of that. So I agree with Kim's perspective of waiting to see if state money becomes available to fund those before putting up the money, because it's extremely unlikely if we buy them and then grant money becomes available, that we would be reimbursed for the cost. And knock on wood, our machines are working and still certified.
Yeah.
There was a point where we thought they were gonna just certify the new ones and decertify the ones that we had. So we'd have to,
That was my.
No,
choice
there's
here.
no
because
way
there's
they
a
can
state
do that.
law that says they only can have 2 certified. So what they did to the ones we have now is
They're extending it or whatever you wanna say.
they're putting it in like a pending certified status to circumvent the RSA that says only 2.
Well, they can't expect the towns to only get that money like
Yeah.
that, because it's not inexpensive, so.
Good question.
So we think the machines we have now will make it this year
Mhm.
and 1 more year?
Well, remember this year, there's no more. No, because it's not gonna happen until next year for the primary.
Okay.
So next year we'll have all the elections, all the lovely elections, and then be able to get them for 25.
Okay,
Because and also I have a really good friend who jumped in and got them all. So she'll be the tester and she'll be able to let me know, hey, they are good. They have to be good because LHS is how we've used what we have for 20+ years. And I can attest with the certifying and the service. The big thing is service. If I need service, they're there. I can call them, get them on the phone, or if I have any issues. That's very important to me. And poll pads are through them. So why would I have one through one company? We're not going to get rid of the poll pad. So makes sense to stay.
They have a tremendous service.
I think so.
So, and can you describe the process of reporting the results to the state? That electronically or?
Oh, no, it's still all paper right now. They're still, they're trying very hard. It would make so much sense if they could just, because when you process with the poll pads, there's a system that can report, print out reports of what exactly, how many people voted. And there's, it's a download that they do to get into election, and that's how the state has it. 20+ states throughout the country do it, but Hampshire's still just holding on, trying to wait to get certified, but I just keep pushing with LHS and trying to contact with the Secretary of State to see, because that would make it so much easier, because we still have to hand check the paper list.
But those are two separate things. There's an important distinction. What Kim's talking about is the voter checklist, just of who voted, right? The state keeps track of who voted. The results aren't in the poll pads at all. The results aren't in the poll pads. And there's not even a pathway right now for those results to be married to the poll pad data and reported electronically.
No,
And it would take the chief or the sergeant out of a late night trip to Rochester carrying the results after, usually at 10 o'clock, but this primary election, it's going to be 2 o'clock because of our president's decision not to be on the ballot.
Thanks, Joe.
I still would love to know who talked him into that, but
Okay.
You have questions or?
did that help you?
Yes, thank you. Because I had heard all sorts of
Oh,
garbage.
yeah,
about
there's a lot of room.
They're gonna be allowed, they're not gonna be allowed.
Oh, yeah, no, I even,
They are going to be allowed, fortunately. There might be a sunset on that, but there isn't one yet.
yes,
I suspect if the state ponies up the money, they'll put a sunset on it. Right? Oh, hey, we're gonna give you the money, so you have to replace them all by the end of 2026 or
But this $18,000 would then be discharged or spent prior to the end of the last election, and what's the lead time to get those machines for next year?
so no, that's not my interest here, don't know. I imagine.
file that next year's problem.
That's next year, 'cause I'm-
Make a note, Steve.
But if the state pays for it, we're not paying that 18 grand, right?
Oh, yes, but I find it very hard to believe they're gonna pay for everyone to get all the machines. If one would be helpful, I would say, but that possibly.
Good question. Any other questions? She gets out easy.
Thanks again.
So wait, so we went through elections, no elections, town clerk, it's pretty straightforward, all the money was for the elections, that's right. So just find out the lead time for those machines.
Come vote. Awesome.
Okay, nothing else.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Okay, let me
Easy
go
win.
help her.
Easy homework assignment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, pretty easy here.
You got it.
See you Monday.
Yes. Oh, yeah, nice. Honors here, any.
Bring treats.
Here? Sure.
Bring treats.
You win.
By the way, I love the Barrington Burgundy watch band.
I know,
Amazing. Yeah,
this is close, it's.
yeah, close.
Have a minute.
It's like a mix between Barrington Burgundy and purple.
I know, well, that's my favorite.
Thank you.
Yeah, come up to the tables. And Peter, yeah, we can make room for sure. Just Pez Recreation Director, Dale Sylvia, Rec Commission Chair. And Dale Sylvia, former Budget Committee member for a number of years. I don't know what number, but a number. There is a number.
Once upon a time.
Eternity. Once upon a time.
The galaxy far, far away.
So I became the recreation director in 2020. We have since then kind of had just the line items that were presented on this sheet. We haven't had any additional requests out of the budget. So this is like the first like true ABC and like budget presentation process that I've had to go through. So for me, I'm not really sure exactly where you guys typically like to start. If you guys have any questions right out of the gate, I'd be happy to answer them. But I also did bring some documentations and kind of like a overview of why we're here today and kind of how we got here. So I just don't know what would be beneficial for you guys to start.
Well, I know what my own view is that since there have been some modifications in the way that the department is run and how the funds are kept in the programs and their funding sources.
Mhm.
And the town has, and the select board has agreed that we should, with the town would carry the cost of salaries.
Yes.
And that the rest would be for the program. So as you go through your discussion, if you could point out changes to that you're requesting, like additional staffing,
Yeah.
funding.
Yep.
And some of the other things, and we'll discuss the warrant requests after that.
Okay. So out of the operating budget, kind of separate from the warrant article is the request to have the administrative assistant. Right now, historically, that position has been 25 hours out of the operating budget. That was established many moons ago and was kind of like the status that we always maintained. When even prior to me becoming recreation director, we had come to the budget process to kind of try to have that position increase to up to like 34, up to potentially 40 hours. Since then, we've added additional program or positions into the department, such as our like program coordinator, our school age coordinator, that are both fully funded out of the revolving fund, and has really started to kind of beef up our department in a lot of those different avenues that we didn't have the ability to do with just that current staff. So with that has created much more of that, like the need for that administrative assistant position, just because that 25 hours was just not enough for that person to be able to continuously maintain the duties that were already on their to-do list, in addition to the, the uptick in phone calls, emails, helping people facilitate registrations, reporting. We just did a large software update and we had to do a lot of kind of like jostling of those reports to make sure that those reports kind of match what the finance department needs. So since my time here, I know that we've tried really, really hard to kind of fine tune those policies and procedures that specifically tied to that position because of the amount of tasks that that person is doing. Every dollar that goes in and out of that office goes through that person's hand at one point or another. So that is kind of like the additional budget request that we have, is the 9 hours out of the revolving fund. I mean, last year we paid for that position, the additional 9 hours and the health insurance out of the revolving fund because that need was so important. Since introducing that position into the department, we've really kind of seen that benefit and really need to kind of reallocate our revolving funds to things that you were talking about, the programs, the program offerings, increasing our program space. So this position is just really kind of that request to have that fully funded out of the operating budget so we can kind of reallocate that revolving fund in different ways to expand. So.
And the budget committee requested the job description at the first meeting. We've all seen that. There was some question about what exactly those duties and responsibilities look like. And just to put a dollar figure on it, the wages and benefits of just the additional 9 hours, 24,000. So it's 24,000 from the revolving fund to the operating budget is their proposal for consideration.
And if we could stay on that topic. In the job description, and go down, and it is a mixture of duties that relate to oversight functions and supporting the administration of the department and supporting the program. So as payments come in for program expenses, those go through the same position. So I go down this and I get a flavor that with that mixture, I'm not sure what percentage of the work is truly administrative nature and support of the administrative tasks, and those that are in support of the program tasks. So that kind of is a piece I'd like to, is 25 correct still, or is it 38? Because it's definitely not 40.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just wonder how we can parse that out to have some little more concrete data to work.
Yeah, and typically in that, I'm not sure exactly which job, like which like tasks on that job description that you're referring to, but typically the only thing that, I mean, yes, I know that the money is coming into the programs and that they're kind of processing that money, but all of what we offer is program somewhat related, whether it's, prepping for that program, taking money for that program, getting everything kind of in check and making sure that that program is even available, I think is always an option. But with this position specifically, they are not, like, we don't even have this person really participating in our community events, where for Fall Festival, we have, upwards, we're anticipating 3,000 to 4,000 people, and we didn't utilize this employee for that program because we know that that position is typically for those administrative assistant hours. That position typically is, and most of the time is always that first point of contact, customer service, reporting. They will send out the constant contact emails that go out to the entire town. But typically it's all of our program staff that are setting up all of the logistics with the programming, the pricing. They're submitting the graphic to be submitted into the actual constant contact.
I can look at some of the things that are part of the job description, whether these are tests that person's actually doing, or when rep staff are doing so. So when I look at this, register participants for programs, that is a specific program activity. Payment of tracking and reconciliation of department programs, that's a definite program related activity. Advertise all programs so we maintain the revolving fund overhead. So an assistant department program schedule. Those are specific items in the job description that say that should be paid out of the revolving fund, not out of administrative expenses. Now, the other tasks that are on here, yes, they're administrative. So I just would like to get the better flavor. Is it 25 hours to the overhead task? Is it 38 hours to the overhead task and then remainder the 40 of our program? I don't know, because there's no way I could support based on this job description a 40 hour.
Can I ask a question? And Dale might be the best one to provide a historical perspective. I understand what you're saying. It sounds like the premise of your perspective is that in your mind, the purpose of the town funding the administrative assistant is only the administrative tasks and nothing to do with programs. I wonder, is it your perspective that was the arrangement at the town level also, or is that just your perspective?
No, that was what the understanding.
Okay. That's your understanding of the history.
So starts.
Yeah. To that point, I would ask Dale, from a historical perspective, was that the deal? I mean, I think obviously the director, the assistant director, and the administrative assistant do a variety of overhead administrative and program tasks. Because all the recreation department does is program. And so there's obviously going to be overlap.
Yeah.
And when the administrative assistant was 25 hours, the administrative assistant was still signing people up for programs and still assisting with program schedules. So what's your perspective of the history of how that was decided to be funded fully at 25 hours from the
I would suggest that it was disputed. Going back then, we were asking those questions when I was on the ABC. We were looking at those things and it was very disputed. We went back. Then we were even going back 20 years, 10 years and trying to get people who were involved and stuff like that. So I don't think that answer has ever fully been, concrete. What I would suggest though, and I understand where you're coming from, you're looking at just that job description. I would ask the ABC to consider this though. Since that job description was written, we've created 2 new positions out of the revolving fund that is paying for that. So we're kind of on board and trying to be aware of those type things and separate the two. That's when I became the chair. One of the things that because I sat in your chair too, and we've tried very hard to keep them separate. So if you're going to look at specifically one line just from the job description, I would ask to say that we have created 2 full positions to support programming, and we're paying for that out of the revolving fund. And this position is truly, is there ever overlapping? Is there do they once in a while, maybe something comes in or, somebody comes in and they ask a question, of course. But this position is truly an administrative position. Yes, there is other stuff, but I would suggest that we actually hired 2 people out of the revolving fund to do that.
If that's true, then you wouldn't need as many hours for this position. So
Times of
if you're saying it now that some of these activities are really being performed by people, okay, fine. Then that still says that why do I need extra hours in this?
Because under Jess's direction over the years, look how much the rec department has grown. We've grown every year. We're offering more programs. We're offering more services. And then you're looking at that one position of what was 25 hours. Could that have been done 5 years ago? Look at, she will talk in detail about how much more stuff we're doing, and it overlaps with administrative.
I'm gonna ask, Peter had a history than I do in this, and when the tech department was formed and all the agreements that went through, and they were kind of ambiguous, it's true. But maybe you could help us out with some of the history that you're aware of.
Well, again, to me, some of the issue is, the initial premise was it was going to be self-funded, wouldn't cost taxpayers anything, just a marvelous thing to have. But again, as Dale just said, it evolved. It's become significantly more than it ever was. And like it or not, I get all of the emails for the credit card transactions. And is it Aaron who handles all those, or? Because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of those every week. And one of the questions that came up either last year or the year before was, are we doing a lot of activity out of town? And it's certainly, I would guess, under 5%. So it's almost exclusively the town of Barrington. We had to charge out of town people more, but that's another story. But again, the question came up is, who's participating in these programs, and it is Barrington residents, without a doubt. So I'm certainly open to where we are. I can appreciate the volume of stuff Aaron is dealing with on Monday mornings.
Specifically Monday mornings.
Yes, I know.
Yes, yeah.
So again, I think $50 grand more is something I wish we didn't have, because the overall budget is going to be monstrous. Add the warrant articles, it would be even worse. But I don't think what they're proposing is outlandish at all.
Could I also have one more thing on that too, as far as what you're suggesting as what is programming is what is not? I would also ask you to look at what they have developed as far as services, how we have grown, that is not programming. I'll give you an example of the summer concert series and things like that, that doesn't have money coming in. It's not programming. All of this has to be, is that programming or not? It's still services we're providing to the public. It has to be coordinated. So yes, I understand what you're saying. There is a little gray area over between, but it's not just all programming. Jess has done an incredible job of developing this over the years, and it's not where we used to be.
And then I've seen a lot of good improvements in that area, and it's what you're doing, especially on some programs. So the programs are very, very good. And I see.
I guess one of the things I really like, and I guess part of this is related, the performance measures that the library provides, you probably haven't seen them, which indicate fairly detailed numbers about how many people are using the program, or the library, what types of materials and how many are being circulated, really helps to build up a case in my mind of any cost increases.
Yeah.
And we don't have that here. We know that it's increasing, but there's no, so if you're increasing fivefold, adding new things, it becomes a lot more obvious why you need that increase in staff.
Yeah.
So it might be useful in the future to provide that.
And that's something that we already have through our Recreation Commission. We have our program report that happens monthly. We take those numbers and we kind of tally them up annually based off of our projections. And I just did this for the budget meeting or the budget presentation that I have to do. And from 2021, our average was about 4,622 participants. By the end of this year alone, we're anticipated to be at 8,304 participants. So we have almost doubled our participant number annually, roughly, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 people, but a large majority of that was because of some of those programs like the summer concert series, the community events. Those type of programs are the programs that everybody has access to. Everybody is eligible. It doesn't matter what end of the financial or family end you are on, it's available. And we're trying really hard to make those events and those type of things have a piece that is valuable to everybody. So for the fall festival, used to just be your standard trunk or treat. If you had kids, come and trunk or treat, everybody else, see you later. We've really tried hard to kind of embellish on that, and we've added the vendor hall. We had the food trucks. Unfortunately, this past year it poured buckets and we still ran it. But we actually had added like an actual concert series to that actual event too. So last year we had over 2,000 people on that event alone, and we had 500 people interested in the event online. This year we had almost 1,600 people interested in the event, and we had over 800 people show up in the absolute.
Pouring. It poured the whole time. Yeah, I came. I told Jess, I was like, newborn at home, not trying to get out of the house. I came because like nobody's gonna go to this event. It's pouring. Like I need to go support like all the work that they did. Like this is awesome event. And we were like wall to wall people shuffling through. I was like, these people are crazy.
Yeah.
Go home.
And they all had a great time. Like
Yeah.
everybody was like, my kid's costume was soaking wet, but thank you so much for doing this. And so with those community events and those type of things too, we're really trying hard to maximize what resources we have. And I think that is the biggest piece for me, is that I have been a part of the recreation department. I mean, I was itty bitty when I started, but this is going to be going into my 19th summer with the department. I've seen this department from a 1 or 2 man show all the way up to where we are now. I think the big thing for me that has kind of started to stick out like a sore thumb is those areas of the department that honestly have no revenue coming in to offset it. So the playground maintenance, those community events, honestly, the administrative assistant position, all of those positions don't have any sort of revenue that kind of comes in and offsets that, where we have been able to justify the need for the program coordinator, the school age coordinator, because those programs automatically, or those positions automatically have funding that comes in to oversee that. What we've seen and what I've experienced now that I'm looking at all the financials, like with a couple of years under my belt, is that we can't continue to grow anymore with what we have available. We are kind of stagnant, or we have to be very creative. We have pursued 2 grant opportunities since my time here. We have received both of them, and we are in the process of pursuing a 3rd one. So we're really trying hard to not just be this little tiny rec department that just offers youth soccer, youth basketball, and an egg hunt. We really are trying hard to be that rec department that offers a wide variety of programs, from adult to senior to midday to weekend to evening. And these numbers directly show that Barrington wants those opportunities. If you build it, they will come. And that has been it speaks for itself. And so for right now, really where we're looking at, when you look at the break even point at the revolving fund, is we don't have any more space and we don't have any more time to add any of those valuable programs that could actually bring in a lot of overhead. But we also don't have any more space or any funding to be able to expand in any other direction. So right now we're kind of stuck because we don't have the space to offer more programming, create more revenue. But we need all hands on deck in order to continue to maintain the current level of service that we have been offering and have increased over the last couple of years.
Is there a report, and I apologize, I'm sort of the new guy last year, but
Yeah.
is there a report or something that documents the history of what you've done and the increases and so forth? I would find that helpful in making financial decisions about what we did in the past, what we had last year, where we are now and where we're going, in order to look at that and get sort of a bigger picture. And I don't know if that's been done before, if we have that.
I'm thinking that the data exists in the town report that's done every year, but what I think would be helpful for you to do is just put that as a 1-pager together
Okay.
and get it to the budget committee to show,
Yeah.
And we'll plan to include that with the budget documents in the narrative in future years.
Yeah.
there's
That would be
value in
helpful to
that.
me, because,
That's all.
Yeah, we have
Justifies
that anyway.
Right.
Cost increase.
yeah, cost increases and what we've done and show the increases for, the services. We did X amount last year and this amount this year.
Mhm.
And that we could justify, increases.
And if it's on the town site, all this material is publicly available, it'd be nice to have that next to this.
Yeah.
Things are
Great
looking
point.
at this space.
Yeah.
Just one point that for those of you that haven't participated in the process longer than 3 years. So you'll see all these placeholder lines starting at recreation contracts down to recreation equipment. They all just have $1 in them. So it was during COVID, two or 3 years ago, the Recreation Commission made the decision that they felt it was tough financial times for the town. And they zeroed out all of those budget requests. And the revolving fund pays for all of those aspects of the operation of the Recreation Department. Historically, they were paid for out of the operating budget. The Recreation Commission said, we will absorb those costs because of the budget increase. I don't know if there's been talk about adding those back in. I think based on the budget that was submitted, the priority that the Department and Rec Commission has identified is the additional administrative hours. But that offset, those are real dollars.
So if we go back and again, I sat in your seat several years ago and I had the same discussions that you're all having behind closed doors. I would ask you to look at the big picture and the people that are new, maybe, these two gentlemen can talk about what we did. All the things we've talked about then, we've been working very hard over the last 5 years. And in fact, I bring it up every, meeting, and they're looking at me, okay, we get it, you run the ABC. And we talk about this every single month. And all the things that we looked at 4 or 5 years ago that we were concerned about, if you look at big picture, I think between the Rec Commission and the staff, we've knocked off almost all of those concerns back then. I believe that we have, and I'm looking at that from both as a taxpayer, as a former ABC member, and as a budget committee member. Even going back to what you were suggesting, we take all of that into consideration from that perspective. And, I appreciate Connor bringing it up. The budget committee nor the selectmen asked us to take those items out. We voluntarily said we will assume everything in the operating budget. So we've taken off all those lines and we have no plans of putting them back. Where the revolving, it's kind of not a peace offering, but trying to work with you type thing. And we really believe that the administrative position it's just something that we need at this point in his staff.
We do recognize the positive growth that you have. Now that you mentioned, I'd like to make a segue a little bit. Questions on the operating. So, and that is the scope of the department. It says you run into perhaps that limitation, which you have no room to grow. And when I look at the one article that's coming ahead, essentially it's expanding the scope of the department to cover other parks and other services and space that the town provides to us, to the city. So that is now creating in my mind, I used to be a board member of Park and Rec department.
Yes, yeah.
That did all of those things.
Yeah.
And that's something that's not in the scope of the charter right now. Something that I think we want to look to the board to say, yes, that's something that we support. Because the things that you mentioned where some of the growth is, this position also supports, really provide those services to the entire town.
Yep.
And that's what the other parks do. That's what we do with the Trails Commission and the Conservation Commission is similar in scope. They have other sources of funding, so as you do.
Yeah.
So the question is, as we go forward, are we really looking to say that this is going to evolve into a Park and Rec department, giving you more space, other things to expand your programs into and support the total population and make it available to the total population? If that's so, and like goes along with that, then we'd be talking about a restructuring of this budget. And then we would have to be faced with, and this is something that I'm looking forward to, of some of the operating line items for maintenance activities would be shared by the town. Unlike what you're doing now, because it's to support your own little facilities, programs and all that.
Yeah.
So we'll have to look for that at the time, if that's where we go. I would like to know whether that is part of your vision as well. When you look at this warrant article and supporting other parks and services in town.
Yeah.
Is that what you see happening?
I mean, yeah, I think Barrington has a lot or we could go in a bunch of different directions. And I think we're ready we're here for the ride. We just need you guys to tell us what role, like what exactly you guys need from us and how we can best fit that expectation of the community. Being a Parks and Recreation Department has, a whole nother element to it, but there's an element to it that we're excited for and that a lot of other departments in this region have a very similar structure for. I think being labeled as a recreation department, but having, $15,000 worth of like a park line within that line, it kind of makes it kind of raise that line a little bit, where if we are a Parks and Recreation Department, it kind of allows everything to be very much like what is a park maintenance versus what is a recreational program or opportunity or something like that. And so I can definitely see us going into that direction. Right now, we only have the ability for that one park space. So I think my hesitancy on like how and when that would be implemented is like how much more of that, like those type of expansions we would do and how many opportunities we have for that. I know that there are a couple areas in town, but I don't know how those would come to fruition or when those would come to fruition, if that makes sense.
And I
The
think,
ABC.
no.
Yeah.
So, everybody takes surveys, right? Like, oh, we want your opinion about housing in Barrington, or we want your opinion about transportation in Barrington. And then everybody just sits on their hands and wonders, okay, I said I want all these things and they never get any of those things. It is different in what I would argue that things do actually happen, just takes a glacial time period. Yeah. But in 2019, the Rec Commission funded a strategic plan and needs assessment, for which you called it. Needs assessment strategic plan. Consultant came in, they had a tremendous response from the community, probably still to this point, the most involved survey data collection we had. And that plan laid the foundation for the growth of the department over the last 4 years and the planned future growth. And I think you make a really good point about, okay, at what point are we tipping and we should call it a Parks and Recreation Department. The direction that I've heard from the select board ever since that 2019 strategic plan is residents said that they want this. When are you going to do it? Make it happen. And the select board has looked to the revolving fund to accomplish those tasks. And we're not here to talk about the revolving fund per se, but the Rec Commission and the Recreation Department have a tremendous plan for accomplishing a variety of those initiatives that residents said that they wanted. Most all of those initiatives are infrastructure, are parks, right? It's water feature, it's additional parks, it's additional play space, it's all of those things that are parks, not recreation per se.
Not the beach. Too.
Oh, we're gonna get a beach. Yeah. Neither Jesse are leaving Barrington until residents have access to a beach. So stay tuned.
Yes, yeah.
But to your point, I mean, I think the select board has already given that direction, that we heard residents just as loudly as you did with the strategic plan. They said that's the direction you want to be. They want you to take the department that way. There are limitations in accomplishing that. They've grown programs and grown the community events because they can do it with what they have. In order to step into an expanded park or program pavilion space or additional other sites around town. But you'll remember a big part of our conversation with the TIF district was recreational space in the town center. That recreational space would be under the jurisdiction of the recreation department, under what would be parks. So I would say this is how government should work, right? We do a comprehensive process, develop a strategic plan to hear from the residents that are responsible for paying for this and using these services. They tell us what we want, we implement it, we work to implement it. And so if you zoom out to that time frame, we're growing to that, right? The department has grown, we're bursting at the seams. We're going to talk in a minute about $1 million grant opportunity to expand program space in order to continue growing and meeting the needs of the residents that they identified in the strategic planning process. So I wonder how we could or should specifically pose that question to the select board and get that seal of approval, right? Because in my mind, it's almost pseudo happen, but maybe it's worth at the budget presentation bringing up that strategic plan and almost like an update, hey, status report, here's where we are. Are we still on the right track? Do you still agree with our trajectory? Would that set your mind at ease that there's
That
support
would
for that
help.
direction?
I
Okay.
think that's a good step along the way.
Mhm.
I would go so far as to say, I'd like to see a new charter
Okay.
that gets presented. I don't know how they get to the select board to say,
Mhm.
we are going to be a part of it. There's that support, and then that would be one of the implementation steps within that charter. But that's.
Yeah, so I don't think that's a short-term
necessary
goal.
to-
Yeah, maybe that's a medium-term goal, not necessarily for this budget cycle, but I think that's, maybe we get support for the trajectory of the department during this budget cycle and then work to, there exists an MOU between the town and the recreation department, or recreation commission, which kind of discusses it's not a charter per se, but it's a.
That MOU is essentially what I was.
Okay, yeah.
Revision to that.
Revisit that in February, March, April timeframe. Yeah. Sounds like a good plan. But do integrate the strategic plan and the guidance from that document into the budget process to kind of bridge the gap. I think that's good.
Are there any other questions about operating budget? Okay, now let's talk about your warrant article.
Yep.
And that gets to double questions. Okay.
Mhm.
Really, it kind of relates to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
Because some activities are maintenance is an operating budget item. It's not, my mind, a warrant article. And warrant article requests for improvements, for acquisition of programs and so on. New spaces, yes. But I have a concept that says maintenance costs are operating expenses. Because they occur and to get a program started, we're gonna have maintenance. Usually that's like we say, okay, we're gonna build a new library, and as related to that, there's going to be maintenance expenses related to that. So, and those will show up in your operating budget in the future. So I would be reluctant to support a warrant article with maintenance expense. But now, other issues I would be putting in here, improvements to parks and such to make them more useful to the residents and participants. That's a very justifiable thing to include. So that's just
But there's nothing itemized that talks about it.
It says it in the
Maintenance.
top, in future infrastructure. The infrastructure, we presumably would capitalize.
Yes, that's the
not.
purpose statement of the warrant article, Peter,
I'm
that they're
looking at this.
referencing.
Oh, no, I'm looking at the warrant. So,
The language of the.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that language, the warrant hasn't been written, that purpose statement hasn't been, it could be a position of the ABC that the language of the purpose statement should only include, well, it doesn't sound like Steve would want it to include maintenance. Back to your previous point about the scope of the recreation department.
Yeah.
You could look at it as a great way to get a litmus test of voters, right? You put it in the operating budget, and you don't really know if voters have the opinion that, hey, tax dollars should pay for these maintenance costs. You put it on a separate warrant article and say, hey, these are maintenance costs, which could very appropriately be in the operating budget. But that gives them the opportunity to say, yes, we want to pay for that with tax dollars, or no, we don't.
what I would present this, by trying to look at the total transparency, I would say this warrant article request is to infrastructure improvements in our parks and other town areas that are open to the public. That's part of the warrant article. And part of the description would say this will have an impact on maintenance costs in the rec department budget in future years. And I would present it that way. So then you're getting the view, they know that if they approve the infrastructure improvements, they're going to be improving the future maintenance costs as well.
But these are
Rather
current
than-
maintenance
These
costs.
are current, yeah.
This is current maintenance costs.
These are
Yes.
current maintenance.
I know,
Oh,
that's what
okay.
I'm saying. I would not approve putting the current maintenance costs in here,
Would you support putting them in the operating budget?
possibly. I would tie those two together.
I understand your point.
Capital improvement requests, and maybe that's the hang up we're on. That, I agree with you. Generally, that's large ticket item. One, a rare occurrence is not a recurring thing, whereas maintenance is a recurring basis. So does this have to be called a capital reserve fund? And
That's, yeah, that's.
because I agree with you, what you said before, that, yeah, the infrastructure and so forth, we put it in there. And then you're right, people can decide, and knowing that down the road, it's gonna cost money with these things. But I see your point in calling it a capital fund, because in my view, also, capital funds are for large ticket items, fire trucks, police cars, buying property for some reason, not for maintenance.
It's a great point. So we're stricken to the framework of the Department of Revenue Administration and the funding mechanisms that statutes make available, right? The easiest, the most dynamic funding mechanism is a capital reserve fund. So that's what we use most of the time. We used a separate funding mechanism for the tricentennial firework. Remember, we added $3,000 or $5,000 a year to that. So we set that up as an expendable trust fund, and it has very many similarities to a capital reserve account. It mostly just has a different name, and it has a different anticipated longevity. Capital reserve fund you establish and you anticipate that that's going to exist forever. You can't change the purpose without 60% of support from residents. And an expendable trust fund is a more short-term funding mechanism, which is outside of annual appropriations. The most important thing is the idea of setting money aside that doesn't lapse at the end of the year. So a detriment.
A comparable thing we're talking about is the library's technology fund.
Right.
It's for, they're not for big capital things, but
Right.
they're for items that have have useful life beyond 1 year.
Yeah.
And so that and it is not used every year, but can include it. They have, $6,000 put aside a year and then expect 15 because you have to now upgrade your.
Point being, it could be an expendable trust fund. I mean, if it's what's in the name, if it felt more appropriate that it was an expendable trust fund, it could be. But a point of the money not lapsing, another counterpoint of the operating budget argument, the last item on here, replacement of broken parts on the playground. It could be that this year there's no broken parts in the playground, and next year there's $10,000 worth of broken parts in the playground. And an account that allows you to continue to accumulate funds that are unspent and maybe reduce a request in future years because you have cash on hand, you've built up a balance that allows you to draw down from. But to you all, so you gotta have an opinion.
To speak to that, I would.
I'm speaking for me as an alternate member of this committee. I think that the idea of a non-lapsing fund makes much more sense to call it a capital reserve. And capital reserve can be important because we're putting courts in places and hard services down, acquiring some land to do these things. Those would be appropriate to reference as part of this capital reserve. Say, here's what we have projected capital reserve. We're going to buy some land and we're going to put down these courts and they're going to cost this much to the party. And then on the other hand, to have this non-lapsing fund for, like Hunter points out, it may not expend it this year, but next year we have one goes down and breaks up the whole rec department or something.
That would be similar to what we do for the emergency plowing. We said, if nature says you guys have to hit the town with this, we have a fund that's available to take care of that. So that's not maintenance, no, in a sense. That's an unusual event. And if somebody broke in. Now, let's take up the current fan. Residents decide they want a pickleball court. Oh, okay.
They have.
It's not a bad.
They are.
Fix that, yeah.
Yeah. We hear it weekly.
I've even gotten the director, the recreation department director. Pickleball. She's not on board yet.
The math just messes me up,
We're working on it.
But
Until the
that,
budget committee.
that to me, it's really a park and rec department. That would fit into that, and that could be part of why we're setting aside this fund, is so that we can provide infrastructure for those kinds of activities. in town.
And we talked about earlier, of what you're planning for expansion, that's what goes into a capital reserve. And I agree, this maintenance actually might be useful to tell people, the taxpayer, this is what we're spending.
Yeah,
Well, that
It's an operating budget.
makes me think of a possible option. Put together one, which is a warrant article request for a capital fund for things like providing new facilities.
But isn't that what the revolving funds for?
That's for programs. That's not for,
It's over
Total
$500,000.
rest- the
That's a lot of
programs are like something that.
The rec commission does plan to use the revolving fund for infrastructure.
Well-
They have money earmarked
Yeah,
for.
but I think
infrastructure.
we're talking about overlap.
Yeah, and there is overlap, no question.
And then we know that we want to have a fund available beyond the revolving fund, which is paid for by fees of participants. Then we could set up that kind of a capital fund for infrastructure improvements. And then also have a non-lapsing warrant article for those things that are events if something breaks or and something else were to occur that required an expenditure of funds that we can't predict, but we need to have a set aside in order to cover that instead of having to hit the residents for big costs all at once.
So I'm hearing you, generally, a couple of you anyways, would prefer to call this maintenance account an expendable trust fund instead of capital reserve
Maintenance component.
for the maintenance component.
Yeah.
I think to the point about setting money aside for infrastructure, there's a little bit of late breaking news to talk about infrastructure wise, and it could be that information delays and the initiative to set money aside, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't add a separate capital reserve request in to start setting money aside for future infrastructure acquisition, construction, whatever the situation may be.
and we have ideas in mind, but we are not shovel ready for any of those projects. So if it was something that we had to, take another year to try to, get some feelers out there, see what other people are doing and kind of reprioritize those projects, then so be it. You know what I mean? We're very, we're flexible, and we know that if we have the opportunity, we're just going to try to maximize that opportunity. And I think, if the warrant article, the capital reserve request isn't the format that you guys were hoping for, I think, with this being my first budget season and all those type of things, I think that was probably some naiveness on my end, but I think that some suggestions that have been created would kind of
Yes, like I
streamline
said,
that
I have
process.
no issue with capital requests for infrastructure.
Yeah.
I do have an issue for capital reserve requests for fund.
Absolutely.
And if you look at the people who've done the best job so far, I think, are fire department, police, and the highway department. They projected out a whole series of costs, things to identify in their capital reserve account. And so we all have this picture, $650,000 pumper in 2030.
That would be nice. 650,000, yeah. Is that an offer? Can you put in a bid for that? Yes.
Whatever the number is,
Yeah.
but it would also help to identify, not just for us, but for the citizenry.
Yeah.
Here's what we're projecting, here's what it's gonna cost, because these things aren't free.
So that document that I said that I had provided here with you guys is within my first year of becoming recreation director, the silver lining of COVID is that everything stopped and we were able to kind of like really get into the guts of why we're doing things and if we could reinvent the wheel kind of thing. So with that being said, one of the things and one of the documents that we utilize religiously is the revolving fund projections. So this revolving fund projections allows us to kind of what our revenue or what our revolving fund balance is going to be a year out from this today. Within that, those quarterly bills projections, we have started to kind of identify what projects are important and what projects and when those can kind of be implemented within the course of the next year. As you can imagine, sometimes some of those projects, get backburnered, re-put back, so it's a lot of shifting based off of opportunity, but kind of going and kind of branching off of what Peter said with the, over $1 million or $500,000 in that revolving fund, is really trying to understand how much money, yes, there's a lot of money that comes into that revolving fund, but there's so much money that goes out. And with those things, I want to just give you guys this as kind of a visual of like where we're at. So it has the last month's revolving fund balance.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, it's taking all of them.
I probably have it memorized.
You had it memorized.
I was gonna say, I probably do. So these are projections based off of our, the pattern that we've seen within our programs, but this also kind of includes what those anticipated quarterly bills are. I want to kind of talk about the revolving fund really quick, and I know that we're not here to talk about the revolving fund, but I think for me, what was a huge eye opener and what kind of prompted our request for the capital reserve expenditures, and the administrative assistant is realizing how much of that overhead comes out of the revolving fund that doesn't have that revenue that comes along with it. So in addition to the community events and some of the playground, encompassing those, we have about $255,000 that is covered by the revolving fund that has no money that oversees it. So that is conferences and trainings. That's our paper, our pencils, our printer, our desks, our computer chairs. We provide all of that through the revolving fund. And so that $255,000 is money that is just basically right off the top, we get no revenue. It leaves us with some money to work with, but with all those positions and all of the support staff that we need to maintain, appropriate ratios, make sure that we're providing that quality of service, we are basically kind of like breaking even every year. With this revolving fund projections, it's been very helpful because it kind of shows, yes, we have that $600,000 at the top, but a year out from now, we are anticipated to be at roughly $281,000 in that revolving fund. Base value, $280,000 or $280,000. We're good, right? But when you go and you look at our quarterly bills, and the one that is not reflected on here is our largest bill for next year, which is going to be roughly between $211,000 up to $250,000. So for us to be at $281,000 really doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room if we have a bad quarter, or if, for example, the wall at the recreation department is replaced and all on-site programs has to shut down for 6 months. That is a direct effect on the revolving fund. So there's some slush fund that we have in there as kind of like, as the rec commission has kind of identified as their like,
Fund balance.
yeah, fund balance. There you go. Yep. But I think that it's important for people to understand that since I became recreation director, we have constantly just been trying to figure out how we can expand, how we can move forward. Similarly to the library, we are both kind of stuck in the space that we have, and we've been patiently waiting for the library to have their opportunity to expand, because that means that we also have the opportunity to expand as well. So when COVID hit, our building was empty. We had nothing going on. I knew that all of this money was sitting in the revolving fund. The gym floor was way beyond needing to be resurfaced. The wall was identified as like the fire separation. We've installed the very large shade structure down at the community playground, as well as purchased the remaining amount for the 15-passenger van that we got through grant funding. So we've really tried hard to identify those projects, and you can see that we're not just identifying them and then backburnering them, we're checking them off the list. We're moving on. I think the van was the next thing that was on our CIP list for next year. We've already checked it off the list because we have it ready to go. So I know that the procedures that we have in place, the players that we have in the game are all on the same page, and we're all making moves. We just are kind of financially starting to kind of get our hands tied because we don't have as much fluff as we normally would have, because we're actually doing things, which is awesome.
Ready to talk about grant?
Yep.
Okay, so did you print copies of this?
I did not.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if you did or if you didn't, doesn't matter.
Okay.
No, we're good. So there's all this federal money that came through. A lot of that federal money was channeled through state grant programs, because it's the most efficient way existing programs get the money down to people. So one of the things that the state of New Hampshire did is they set up a community center investment program. And this is a one-time grant program that they actually split up into two sections. So it's kind of like two companies. But the first session was in April. They gave away $9 million and they're giving away $11 million grant.
6.
They're giving away $6 million.
There's only 6 left.
How'd they lose $5 million?
I think they gave more in the
It's
first round.
government,
Typical overhead. Yeah, that's the consultant they paid to manage so they're giving away $6 million. I stand corrected. Applications are due in November. So they're giving up to $1 million award. And this is a great opportunity to take the building at 105 Ramsdale Lane and be able to make improvements to turn it into a more of a community center. It dovetails beautifully with the library's plan to acquire a separate facility, move out, have space available. So there's a lot of moving parts. And Jesse talked earlier about a lot of the decision-making is based on opportunities because they get all of these plans ready and you kind of have to be ready to pivot and approach it. So this is another perfect one of those situations, right? So we are pursuing $1 million grant for community center to invest $1 million in 105 Ramsdale Lane. There's a $150,000 match, which the rec commission has already said we'll use cash on hand to fund that match. Zero additional requirement from taxpayers. So that is a possibility. That is something that we are hopeful for. We will know in February or March.
Beginning of March.
Ish when a decision on that grant. That the way that piece coincides with this conversation is the library warrant article and the inclusion of funds to retrofit the space vacated by the library upstairs in that warrant article. The select board's position is that it makes sense to include those funds in the library warrant article. And so they move out. We don't have to hit up taxpayers for more of an opportunity or more money to make that space functional. So there's a lot of possible realities, right? We could get the grant and the library could pass. We could not get the grant and the library could pass. We could not get the grant, the library could not pass. And so we kind of have to plan for all of them. And I hear reverberations of the Richardson Pondan conversation, like there's so much we don't know, and there will be so much we don't know, but I say we like I got a mouse in my pocket. Jesse and Sarah and the rec commission are starting to develop a clear picture of how to handle the different discrepancies. And so the biggest thing about this grant is it's a non-refundable, or it's a refundable loan. No, a forgivable loan. The structure of it is a forgivable loan, which means voters have to approve the loan as a bond initiative, essentially. It's similar to what we did a couple of years ago for the asset management forgivable loan. That was only $30,000, but it's the same mechanism. The benefit of that is that there are far fewer federal regulations for that type of grant if it's a forgivable loan than if it's a cash upfront grant. Anyways, we will need, with the select board support, to present a bond article to accept and expend that grant. And it will have a match, which will be funded from the Recreation Revolving Fund. So it will be no tax impact. It will be raise and appropriate $1.15 million, $1 million to come from this non-refundable grant, $150,000 to come from the Recreation Revolving Fund. We could also include the funds to retrofit the library space in that article instead of in the library article. So that would do a couple of things, and there's pros and cons to all of it. And I honestly don't know if I were king for a day how I would decide, but for conversation's sake, if we're looking at realities that we don't get the grant, but the library does pass, then we would need that to pass so we have money to retrofit that space. But it would give residents an opportunity to say, we want to retrofit that space in the community center space. If the library fails and that article passes, that and the rec department doesn't get the grant, that gives them funds to work on that expansion of the community center, which there's already drawn up plans for, into the parking lot towards the ECLC. So I'm sure you need a lot more information to wager a decision, and we're just scratching the surface right now. But what are your thoughts? What do you need us to do for homework and bring back so you all can render a recommendation on how it could be structured?
I guess I'd like to see all the options, you know, if A, then B. Let's just.
Funding and where it would go and how.
Here are the possibilities so that we can understand that. And I think so the community can understand that. That's
No
the
question.
important thing. Let's figure out,
I agree.
you know, what we need to do and what our options are.
It needs to be explainable to the community.
Right, well, this one is,
Same conversation.
if you have the space, then here's how you retrofit, what the cost of doing that. If you have to create space, and then here's what we would be able to do with that space, which would be less than what we might be able to do with that.
It's basically a table in which the recreation department of all town, like, they do such a fantastic job of making graphic representations of mostly their programs. But we could do that for, explanatory purposes also. But I described it to Jesse almost like a flow chart. Outcome in one column and scope in the other column, right? So end outcome.
Well, you're at it to one for the dam.
Like recreation department? Okay, yeah. But outcome, library passes, receive grant, additional funding from taxpayers. This is the scope that would be accomplished with that. Library passes, no grant, this is the scope that would be accomplished. Library doesn't pass, no grant, this is the scope that would be accomplished. Everything fails, do not. So yeah, we will work on that. And the Recreation Commission funded an architect to design some conceptual plans for renovation addition downstairs. The select board through the library trustees authorized funding from the library community center capital reserve to fund architectural design of renovating upstairs in the library. The architect costed out the design plans at $1.2 million to retrofit the same footprint of the library for recreational purposes. And so that's a little bit scary of a number, but that's where outcomes and scope will be able to have some clarity once we have downstairs kind of options designed out, costed out, and do that. But in a general sense, what are your thoughts on, with that kind of new information, money in a grant article for retrofitting vacated library space or making improvements to 105 Ramsdale Lane, or including it in the library corner? Or you still maybe just don't have enough to conceptualize it, which is I don't know that I do.
Yeah, it's hard to understand. What is the overlap between the community center idea of the library and the recreational view of the recreation department? Where does the community piece overlap or not?
So we really want to try to kind of enhance a lot of our senior, as well as some of our just general open to the community style programs. One of the ideas that we've always wanted to do, we just don't have the space to do it, is some sort of senior luncheon. And if we were to expand either up or out, we would be able to either reallocate the space that is already set up somewhat, has the cabinets and the refrigerator, saying we'd have to add a stove. There's minor things that we'd have to do, but really starting to kind of add programming that is multi-generational. So a portion of that is the senior, if we did the senior luncheons, we would be collaborating with the ECLC and having some of those kindergartners coming up, and they would be the servers and helping hand out the food, clear out the plates. Another piece of that is the community garden that we've just recently started with the food pantry. That's a combination of, rec participants, ECLC kids, people from the food pantry, volunteers. So we're really trying hard to kind of encapsulate as many people within that 105 Ramsdale Lane property as we can. Yes, the library is going to offer, similar opportunities. For example, they just offered a rope tying course, something that could probably be offered within either one of our departments, but that is something that they're doing in their purview, where we're really kind of focusing on more of those I don't know how to explain the programs that we're going, but more of the open, accessible, free flow style programming that we've been able to offer, like some of those like community events, the senior luncheon, those type of things. So I don't
know, I could be mistaken in your question, but I think you're talking about, so how is a library was presented a couple of years in a row as a library community center, and how is that? My understanding is that with a smaller footprint of a building, the library's focus is library space. And the kind of big picture plan is turn the vacated space into community center space. It is a very real expectation that the library would program bigger or programs that have different needs in the community center space that they vacate. That is the, the library, the 12,000 square foot library had 1,000 square foot meeting room. The 426 Caleb Highway Library wouldn't have 1,000 square foot program room like that. And so the community center piece would be used by community members, departments, community groups, et cetera. Does that answer your question?
It does.
That's the vision.
And one of the things, yeah, because we've talked about this vision, and when we were talking about having a new library built right next door to the building, it was very convenient with the idea, if we have a big program that has, we need space for 100 people, we'll just book that space. We'd still do the same. It just won't be quite as, it won't be like walking from the library parking lot across the playground. The other thing that library programs generally are focused on cultural initiatives as well as other things, but they're all free. That's we do not charge and cannot charge for our programs. So we don't have the money-making capacity. Not that everything that the rec does is money-making, but they have that opportunity, shall we say, to be more self-supporting. If that's helpful. But,
Yeah,
so we're really, it becomes that bigger vision. That's what we thought about as we looked. The meeting room, and we'll talk about this when library gets up to that. It does have a meeting space that is larger than the little children's room we have now, but it's not a subdividable space. It is not a space where we can run two concurrent programs. It won't be 1,000 square feet. And that was at the time, we didn't have that concept. I think years back when the library, we figured rec will get that space and they'll do with it what they want, but we didn't really work together to envision how it could work.
That's a good question because it relates to what we're talking. The library is free services and program and so on.
Correct.
But is your space the same? So could if you had space, the rec department with a program that they're charging a fee for, use that space.
Use the current library space, sure.
space.
Once you get rid of all the books and all the stuff in that
No, I'm
library.
talking about in the loop, in the new library. Where
Oh, in the new
the
library.
space that the library is responsible.
The current space,
No, any space the
Okay.
library is responsible for.
right?
Can that space be used by a different department for a revenue generating program?
Liz, you know.
Interesting question.
It can be.
If it makes a difference in how we structure
Right.
these.
I'll
warrant
tell you
articles.
what has, what some other libraries have done. They have a large meeting space and they rent it out
Okay.
to, wedding
Use that
showers,
language.
businesses that want to have a larger meeting.
Okay.
So it can.
It can do it, so
It can
the
be.
space itself can be rented out
Yes.
for even a revenue. producing.
Right.
It's just
Okay,
an
but you
extra
cannot put a
library.
program in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was in the
That's
community
common.
center, it was.
But it almost, it seems like there's a
The upstairs.
a
That's the upstairs.
confusion between the library and the
Jason.
rec center, right?
Sorry.
And I almost, we're talking about them as separate, but they're really in
We're
many
not
ways
competitive.
integrated.
Well, it's a question of how you structure the warrant articles.
Yes, it is.
To make it saleable and more saleable, which if we package the renovation space in the old building with library or package it with the grant money that.
I think the outcome we're trying to avoid, in my opinion, the outcome we're trying to avoid is that there's no funding available to make the space that's currently occupied by the library useful.
Right.
And the only way to guarantee that is if you include funding in the warrant article, in the library warrant article. So if it passes, you have money for retrofit. The option that I tested the waters about here would be that separate article that is in conjunction with the grant article that makes money available. So you could end up with a reality where that money is available even if the library doesn't pass. And improvements could be made to 105 Ramsdale Lane, again, with this table with the outcome and scope, you know, that would become more clear. But yeah, we need to plan for what if the library passes and no other money becomes available? How do we make sure we can make that space functional and it's not just sitting there? We have to go back to voters the next year and say we need $500,000 to do the bare, you know, I don't say the bare minimum. 500,000 wouldn't be bare minimum.
Nobody, we don't like talking about school. But now that there's a much interest in vocational type programs, you go to the school and you say, hey, we got this space now. We didn't have it funded, so we could do anything with it. Why don't you set up a vocational program to treat some trades, bring your students up here and they can renovate the space for us?
Okay, so once they have our own high school, I think that would be easier. So if you just, this is not for anything other than because a picture's worth 1,000 words, but
Go down a little bit more.
this is
There's
the
one that doesn't
idea.
have all those.
Oh,
Keep going.
okay, yeah, right here.
Yep.
So I wish I could rotate it like this. Okay, you don't need to read anything, so it doesn't matter. This is the main entrance to the current library. This is the conceptual, like, this is the, I don't say the dream, but this would be the ideal design of a renovation for, to make the space functional for recreation and community center purposes. So you'd come in, the stack area would be two program rooms, two big program rooms over here. You'd have access downstairs to the current where the kitchen is and the gym area is. And then all of the office, all the front facing portions of the recreation department would move up here. So this is the $1.2 million scope of how to retrofit that. It would be possible to make the vacated library space functional without doing all of these things. And that's the outcome and scope thing that we kind of have to refine to identify. And, you know, like I was talking to Jesse about it, I don't think I had the same conversation with Susan, but it would make me uncomfortable to include in the library warrant article a $1.2 million price tag to do this. That seems like scope creep as far as, you know, overshadowing the purpose of the article, which is a new library. And so I don't know what that number is. Maybe the maximum is like 20% of the library article should be, you know, like renovations, you know, making that space functional. Or maybe it's some combination, right? Maybe there's a bare minimum that's included in the library warrant article. So if it passes, we know that a certain amount of money would be available. And if we receive the grant, maybe there's some additional funding in there that would be available to bridge the gap.
Well,
I don't know.
the conceptually, the resistance to the library proposals in the past is it was a library community center. And to the extent you're now saying, I'm going to renovate the old space to make a community center out of it, that if it's part of the library, I don't think that's going to have a good reception.
So you think politically it's.
And I think the extra cost in itself.
Right.
I think they're possible too. But it's almost, I mean, to me, this is really exciting because I think these two definitely take Barrington to a new place. And I'm worried that talking about each of these individually doesn't do the justice of what the vision is for this, right? Because you're talking about, this is really more of a step change. I mean, this is a huge change that you're talking about. And I worry that by somehow separating these off into separate articles, people don't get the big picture. And this to be able to have, I mean, you're talking about having a beach, you're talking about having this, you know, you're talking about the library. It's like, it's part of this grand plan that I think people should also be visualizing and understanding. And that each of these is just one step along that path. And this is where we're going as a community, because it's a real vision to me.
Yeah, and you know, we did the town hall article. It was two articles. We had one bond article and one use unassigned fund balance article. And, you know, we explained that both of these need to pass for things to proceed. So, you know, it could be successfully presented as separate articles under the same umbrella, under the same vision. I just still think that we have to plan for the reality that the library passes and nothing else does, and what do we do with that space? Because I think it would be difficult to make it really functional with $0.
On the flip side of that, though, and from the recreation standpoint, I think the one pro to having it separated out is because it allows us to not have just like 1 or 2 eggs in the basket. It allows us to have like 6 or 7. And regardless of what the outcome is for either of those, it allows us as a department to expand, even if it's a little bit. And I think historically, that's something that I have seen, past recreation directors really kind of struggle with, is that we're sitting and we're waiting. We don't have the ability to spend some of those funds. Then people are like, oh, the revolving fund has X number of dollars in it. They're not doing anything with it. And it really.
Nobody can see that.
And I don't mean actually necessarily join the warrant articles together, have a
Okay.
combined article. I'm talking about more the
I
consent
didn't
of
mean
the
that
town
mean, Peter.
on the concept of where we're going, right? To
Absolutely.
me, that's the real win.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of effort. There's not a lot of time to do it. And I think that would be important if we could figure out how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this does that, right? There's enough component pieces, I think, to make an attractive vision. If we can package it up and describe it to people in the right way, that support this and we will give you this.
Yeah. I mean, who knows about the town beach, but if you start to bring that in.
I had to bring it up.
Start to bring it in saying this is where we're going, and you're taking people down a path, you're helping them visualize where we're going, which is hard to do. Even say on the budget committee, to really see all those moving pieces now it fits together.
Right.
Are there any towns that you guys are aware of that have been really successful at that? Like, is there a model that we could utilize to have that, like a town that is just very aggressive and consistent with those CIP plans or that projection from year to year? Do you guys know any?
I don't. But
I can do some research and look. It was just a thought. I was just
Yeah.
thinking of, somebody out there is clearly
It's marketing, really.
doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And communication, I think.
The only town I've heard about, I don't know that it was CIP, because I think they did it in one fell swoop, was that Canterbury did
Okay.
a lot at once.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they had old buildings to reuse or
Mhm.
something,
Mhm.
but that often was sort of laid out as Canterbury did it.
Yeah, I
But
can
a
look
much
at it.
smaller town.
Yeah. Yep.
And I don't know about Moulton Borough.
We work very closely with Molten Borough, so I can reach out to.
I mean, 'cause they had, the rec is here, the new library, of course, they have multi-million-dollar cottage owners on the lake, but.
Yeah, when you have a $10 tax rate,
I know,
you have
yeah.
flexibility.
And their town hall looks like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
grandiose.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look.
Because what happens if the library fails in this whole thing, then, right?
I don't like to have people
No,
even say.
No, but it
If
derails.
it fails,
all of
I'm moving
her
out of town.
ideas, right?
Well,
It's that linkage to me that's important, because you
Yeah.
moving is what's enabling her to expand.
That's a good
And so it's not
But,
just you.
but, so the recreation department has, and you can send that to me, and I can pull it up if you want, but during COVID, the recreation department had engineered plans designed to do an addition out the end of the gym. They would move their offices out there. And what we're having the architect do right now is look at that scope and see how that scope could be expanded or adjusted to give the opportunity for additional programming space and additional growth, holding constant the space upstairs. It could be an either or, it could be a both.
Mhm.
And so that's the piece where outcome scope, that will be on that list. And we'll have some plans. The plans that we have just show an addition straight out. And it would look a little bit different, but that's a reality that we're preparing for.
Well, I'm willing to help.
I-
if you
that-
need our
that,
some
You know,
language.
the
Okay.
I really
idea
appreciate
that,
that.
that the library fails and rec gets an expansion and the library is left in its 3,700 square feet is more painful than I can. I mean, I know you're looking at,
Well, I think the biggest likelihood of that is the grant. I think the biggest likelihood of the library failing and the opportunity to expand would be receiving that grant. I don't think that there would be money otherwise, right?
But yeah, and by separating the two, it reduces the total bonded requirement for the
For the
library.
library.
And I think that would be a positive. Just,
Yeah.
here we
Well,
are,
the
we
other
have
thing-
downsized, and look, we have a lot.
This is the smallest possible number.
Right.
Well, not only is it, this is the best possible deal that we'll ever get is buying that building. Because we had a design for a 10,000 square foot building this summer. And without having costed it out with the subcontractors, using an average cost per square foot in libraries these days, it was looking like total all in was like $6 million. And total all in, without considering, grant money and all, is less than 3.7. 3.7 if we replace the HVAC, which we're not gonna do. If we replace the roof, which we're probably not gonna do. So it comes down to like 3.5 million. The difference between 3.5 and 6 is huge. And if the voters and ABC and the select board say no on this $3.5 million library, we're never gonna get a better deal. So that's my emotional pitch on that.
Everybody I know that's heard of the library idea, it's like, it makes sense. It's like, well, duh, right?
You're panning.
But,
To me, it's all about vision when you're asking. That's at least been my experience in the business, and I think it
and
would be
people have
here.
asked, oh, that's a great idea. And what's gonna happen to the old space? They're already asking. And you're right, there are some people who said, we're looking for a library, not a community center. Other people said, we're looking for a community center, not a library. So I think there is a growing support for a community center. I think they'll like the idea of rec. I hate to say being in charge of that, but basically it makes sense. The library doesn't want to be doing senior meals.
This is that addition out the front of the gym. So those are 7 parking spaces right now. So that's the footprint of the addition that was already fully designed. This is a full design packet. Went to the planning board and everything. So that's the starting point for a scope that changes the footprint of the building on that side. And we'll see what the architect has for new ideas. It's the same architect, but different kind of.
And even just having this type of area alone, right now, our gym floor is, regardless of how much you try to maintain that thing, when people are walking off with only, 6 feet of rug before they're hitting that rubber, between salt and sand and summer camp and just everything, that floor takes a beating. And so I think just to even have, additional expansions off of that side will just improve the facility maintenance that we have. Because that everybody is literally walking through this to the office back and forth over and over again. So that's just one thing that I've noticed with the floor that was recently put in, is just how much people have to walk across that with not ideal things on their feet. So just wanted to make that.
So you're saying you might need both, really, renovation of the upstairs and some addition.
That would be ideal, but we'll take what we can get.
But you'd still have the same problem if people enter the gym directly from the outdoors.
We would most likely be having people enter through the, depending on what this, the flow of is and how we're gonna have staffing. But during the daytime, majority of those office requests would be able to be accessible through upstairs and through the main vestibule area in the library.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the people that are coming in to play basketball, they're taking their boots off anyways, switching into sneakers and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to kind of bring the trend.
So at the pickleball.
Oh, those pickleball people, yeah.
That's the back place, right? I don't understand. It's shady at that.
Okay, did we head spinning enough on that? There's more to come and we're gonna work
No,
on.
we don't have to come to a decision. You're gonna
Yeah.
bring us more data. Do you have enough to work on to know what we're asking now?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I have a question on the revolving fund projection.
Mhm.
Okay. I need some clarification on the grant match and the rec garage.
Yeah.
Are those already in place, or those are projected to be in place?
So we recently advertised for an RFP for the recreation garage. for a combination of a couple of different reasons. The summer camp shed that's located directly behind the playground is beyond dilapidated. It has seen,
The old ambulance bay.
no, the
Behind the
summer camp
playground.
shed that's
Oh,
like
okay.
down by the playground. Like literally, I was wheeling the grill in there for barbecue and it fell through the floor because the floor rotted through. It needs to go. So what my plan is to take the shed that's currently located next to the large fire tower and relocating it down to the summer camp shed, discontinuing the summer camp shed, and then building a larger garage up there for storage as well as van storage. With the van being super tall, we need to make sure that we have that accessibility with like the taller doors. So this is kind of like the kind of killing two birds with one stone kind of thing. We need storage space, but we also need the van storage and a shed. So that was put out for bid or for pricing right before we found out about the grant opportunity. And as we were kind of looking at Ramsdale Lane and, food pantry, all of the different, entities that were on that property, I decided to not move forward with that, not knowing if that portion could or couldn't be encompassed within the potential grant opportunity that we were applying for. I am trying hard to find temporary storage this winter, knowing that at this point that finding a contractor before snowfall is not going to happen. So I think we're going to try to find somewhere for this current winter, but coming up in the future, we are going to need to replace that shed and find storage space for that.
Right,
van.
and do we
So,
currently have the van?
yes,
And wouldn't those expenses then reduce the Q3 or Q4 or some bill?
those are not included in quarterly bills because we don't necessarily know exactly when they're going to take place. So with all
But
these,
then there's duplication of those amounts. If it's in, say, van and storage at 155,
Mhm.
then it's also included in the bills that come subsequently.
those are projected quarterly bills. So that quarter Q3 bill hasn't come out yet, or the Q4 bill we haven't received yet. The rec garage is just earmarked in there as its own.
Yeah, but my point is you can't take them out twice.
I don't under,
We didn't put it in the quarterly.
it's not
It's not
included in the
that.
quarterly.
It's
bill.
not in that. That's a separate thing. It's not in that quarterly bill.
Help me out, Amy. If they were to spend, let's just say a number, $200,000 in the month of November, wouldn't that then be deduction from any bill they get for fourth quarter?
It's just the garage. Useful time for that garage is.
But then go back to the grant. What I'm saying is if those two things are gonna be expenditures, then wouldn't those then reduce the quarterly bill?
No, I thought it would increase.
It would increase,
Yeah.
It would increase. We didn't add those. This isn't a actual billing process, the accounting process. This is just our figures or our projections. We did not add that garage into any of these quarters. The quarterly bill is just what the expenses are gonna be.
Mhm.
So what would happen is, if the way you're looking at it, you could take 155 out of the rec garage and add it to a quarterly, the numbers are gonna be the same. It's not gonna reduce anything.
It's like an
We didn't have it in
encumbrance.
there.
It's like an encumbrance of their fund balance. They have balance available, but they have that committed, almost like what Jack Gale's been doing with the conservation fund. You know how he does his accounting, he says, yes, we have 600,000 available, but we've committed 100,000 to the Landry project, but we haven't transferred those funds yet. We've committed $65,000 to the Dudzik property, but we haven't transferred that yet. Same kind of idea. It will show up on a bill at some point
Mhm.
when the quarterlies are reconciled. Don't know when that's gonna be, but it's not available to spend because it's been committed but not spent yet.
Peter, are you thinking because the notes say anticipated includes van in the quarterly, in the quarter three anticipated?
Right.
Is that why?
That was-
Because the note says includes van?
Yeah.
You think it's doubled?
that was supposed to be removed and I apologize for that miscommunication. That was left on the
Well, it
last
makes me
bit.
feel a little better.
Well, now I'm sorry, yeah, no, that I totally understand, but yes, just to clarify, that is not there, there's a separate line item, and then the quarterly bills are just all of our quarterly expenses.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, did you have another question on?
No.
Or was that it? Okay,
I just didn't understand what was going on. I
Yeah. we just don't know when everything will come to fruition, so we put it on there in hopes that it will happen, and then we can allocate it appropriately when we know more, so.
Any other questions?
I don't think so, I appreciate you guys asking questions and at least hearing us out
Very
and
good discussion.
understanding the
Yes,
recreation
yes,
department a little bit, we really appreciate it, so. All right, good luck on your
We're
last
trying to be easy
conversation.
on you this.
That's all right. I'm little, but I'm mighty, so just kidding. Right.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Tim.
I'm going home for bedtime. For my kids, not for me.
5 minutes to get to my next meeting.
Did they do the grocery for you?
Yeah, Josh bought a lot of trick or treating. Dad of the year.
Super dad, yeah,
Yeah.
super dad for sure.
On behalf of the rec commission, thank you. Wanna thank you
Yeah,
for your
thank you for
support.
being here, yeah. absolutely. We can make more room. Yeah, Jeff.
Welcome. Thank you. And I don't know if you've got a chance to meet our library director, Liz, who's been on since the 1st of April. And she came to us from Nottingham, so she has experienced budget committee.
Yeah.
Just before, but not here. So I think what we'll do is obviously start with the budget. What I did last year, I think Connor's suggestion was, we did like what's increased, what's decreased. We're happy to answer any question, even if something has not changed. You know, it's zero, but when you read through the budget. So did you bring stuff to share with people?
Oh, yes, I
Oh,
did.
great, okay. So we have packets for you. Sure. And this has the building stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is has the detail on the buildings as well, so one package.
Thank you.
No,
I have money.
so Liz, why don't you take it from here? I think Liz is gonna review what's increased, what's decreased. As I say, we'll answer any questions on anything.
Yeah, we've had a pretty good year. We are decreasing for 2024, the library building improvements and maintenance. We worked out an agreement with the Public Works Department, so that they're gonna resume snow removal for us, so we don't have to pay extra for that. Another area that we've added money to is book collection and maintenance. That's purely inflation. The cost of plastic to cover books has gone up by at least 10% since the pandemic, unfortunately. We've added a little bit on the next page. I apologize, I printed one on the back of the page, just trying to save money by taking paper. For advertising and public relations, not a huge amount, just $30, but with the view that we are going to be having to do some more for advertising the whole library department, putting our programs out there and getting people on board. Dues and fees, we did add about $60 for because New Hampshire Library Association fees are higher. We have 3 staff members who pay for their memberships. Movie licensing costs went up this year, and for some strange reason, Zoom has increased its cost to $12.79 a month from $10 a month. Guess everybody's using it. Another area that I'm sure everyone's aware of, we've gone up is postage. I think rates went up a minimum 13% this year. I've already heard that there's going to be another rate increase in January. More to come. Digital materials, we are going to go up a very slight percentage in that they become so popular, and the licensing publishers are laughing all the way to the bank with the digital materials, unlike a book, which we buy for the library and we can check out as many times as we want. Digital materials, the publisher will not let us just purchase a copy. We can rent a copy for 2 years and 24 checkouts. And then once those checkouts or those 2 years are up, we have to pay for it again. We have to relicense it again if we want to keep using it.
So that's the downloadable books program for the
Yes.
state library.
Yes, and everybody in New Hampshire loves that one. So that's going to cost us an extra $700 more this year. Usage determines the cost to the town. And we also subscribe to Hoopla through Barrington.
Drop Tupelo down a little bit to try and make up for the larger change that New Hampshire downloadables is going to be showing us. So what I am seeing on my operational budget, just operational minus the staffing costs, is we're actually following a dropping cost of minus 2.5%.
The downloadable book,
Mhm.
the cost to buy the book versus the digital fees,
Mhm.
where's that? Is it more expensive in the digital version?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yeah, they don't allow us to purchase them.
okay,
It's a lease.
right.
Were you talking about actual paper?
Yeah, so you could buy a paper book of John Grisham's latest, whatever, I don't know, if he's got one, but, and have that, we could circulate that
Yes.
forever,
And we do.
and you do. Or you buy the digital version for 2 years and you only can,
It's the state consortium that does the purchasing, and the problem is that during COVID, we got everybody hooked on audiobooks and ebooks.
Yeah.
And readers, and publishers have made, we couldn't just totally cut that out. Everybody, it's an expected expense at this point.
And that's about probably 200 of the libraries in the consortium statewide.
Yeah, the whole
So
statewide.
it's like the state may buy John Grisham really popular, they might buy 50 copies of that. They look at how long the waiting list. I get on one and I'm like, this is gonna be available in 22 weeks. You know, that sort of thing, and then they'll buy more copies.
but then the state has to redo that 2 years down the road and
If
revise.
if it's still popular, maybe they whittle it down. So it's not the individual library. It's possible, there is a program where an individual library can buy, can pay extra to the state to get priority access for their residents. That's
I
how
used to have
understand it.
that over in Nottingham. It's called Advantage. You buy a copy and your residents get first crack at it. It isn't in the statewide.
We don't do that because
Okay.
It's horrendously expensive.
As far as the wages and salary, Connor and his staff calculate that for us. Some things came in less than last year because we had a vacancy in the director position. So we had to budget that, assuming that the director would take the most expensive health plan. And well, we got lucky.
I
They
didn't.
Take the most expensive.
These are those census changes we talk about. They go up and down. But yeah, in a vacancy, we try to budget that way. And then the only other carryover, some of the changes that the library made to staffing last year took effect in April. And so they were only budgeted at 75% for this year. And so they're budgeted at 100% for next year. So there's minor increases. And, we actually have that document here. This is how we've been presenting those those position related budget impacts and showing what the anticipated impact is in the following year. So you'll see we have that library change. Oh no, that's a different one. Library. So $10,000 in this library budget is the 25% that wasn't budgeted last year, essentially. So.
And I just want to be absolutely transparent. We have one position, for it up there, but I should put it here, that we filled last fall. It's our technology librarian. We renamed it the program and social media specialist. We advertised that about 3 times. We finally got some halfway decent applicants. And we got very fortunate. We got a fabulous person that person does all the technology for the library, maintains the website, all the Facebook postings, all the social media activity, as well as assisting with programming and circulation. And we have had, one of the reasons we have challenges in hiring some of our positions, that one, it was one desk clerk actually is another, because it's so low paid. People will say, I make more bag and groceries at Market Basket. Why would I, take $2 less an hour to work in the library? But it's not that this worker has threatened that she's leaving us any day, but we know in replacing that person that offering a a wage of, less than $18, near $17 is not gonna, it's not reasonable. And we also looked around at what other libraries have for that same type of position. And we knew that Chesley Memorial Library in Northwood has a starting salary of $18.84, and they searched for months. I think they finally hired a part-time person. I don't have more detail about that, but I understand they have to hire somebody who has minimal skills, and it's going to be a long range. Hampstead Public Library, a town of a similar size, and we have I guess we have a hand. We can send you this information anyway. Their starting salary for that position full-time is $28.36 an hour. And in Northampton, they are currently searching for a person. Their starting salary is $23.07. So we felt it was reasonable. The trustees decided we would like to move that one up one step in the grade from grade 5 to grade 6. So it's not a huge increase. It's not a lot of dollars because it doesn't change any benefits. But I just wanted you to know that that is included in our wage proposal for next year. Do you have any questions for us on any of these line items? On the budget?
I thought it was pretty reasonable.
Getting rid of and I have to say, I take every opportunity to compliment Mark and the staff at the highway department, because a problem we ran into was the shed that we placed and where it was placed. And it really didn't work well for snow removal and it didn't work well for us. And we worked with them to reorient where it would be. They came in, they did a fabulous job. And I think we're all happy, and it really has allowed us to, for them to come back and be able to help us with that snow removal. So that was the biggest reduction.
Now, a question on the positions. We went to the town, went through a whole position survey, what, 2 years ago?
No, last year.
Last year. So,
Yeah.
Well, we've done it a couple of times. We did it a few years ago. That was like the first time in a long time.
Right.
And then the select board did an update last year.
okay. That includes these positions.
Yes. And
But they're not.
we didn't press for change then. Well, the position was vacant at the time. But and perhaps last year we should have said this position, please. We should have done the same thing with the desk clerks. The trustees last year moved the desk clerks from grade 1 to grade 2, which is still
It's $13.24 now.
$13.24 an hour. And these are people that are, doing the checkouts, working with the computer system, answering reference questions.
If you have a turnover, then.
And-
it would be applicable.
And they actually those positions turn over.
Next.
So I think we just hired our desk clerk, our ILL librarian left. So one of the desk clerks moved into that position, needed to hire a new desk clerk, just hired a fellow who hopefully will work out very well, and he's a retiree, so he's less demanding about wages necessarily. So that's where we are on that.
Other questions on that?
Okay. The package that you have has a couple documents. It has, this has my notes on it, but this is the budget that the architect worked up, and we had a building committee and trustee meeting last Wednesday to review that. The other thing that we did was, John, when I sent out that to folks, first you just come to, I think, probably a discussion of the new library. John sent us a list of very good questions. And so we've compiled answers to those. Want to give it to you in writing. And Connor has pitched in, and I've reviewed this with him several times. So you asked about the purchase price of the building. And Connor, do you have any updates on that?
No updates, no
So-
updates under negotiation.
The list price is 1.1 million. Connor made a pitch that they should just donate the building. It was worth a shot.
It's worth a
I thought
shot.
it was a very.
It was worth a
And they
shot.
said,
They said no
no.
thanks.
Didn't work out well in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I thought they
Right.
could bill since they make it
$1
way of
went for
major
9
medical
million.
response in our town. They might feel some guilt, but apparently that's not in their DNA. So,
They don't feel guilty.
so we certainly hope we don't have to pay more than the list price. And I know Connor said the attorney, the town's attorney is handling those negotiations. So I hope we have a response within the next week or two.
I think that's reasonable. We've made a formal offer. We offered in lieu of, paying a deposit, right? Because it's not great for a town to come up with a non-refundable deposit. We offered to abate the taxes, pay the utilities through March and take care of the winter maintenance, because of course we're asking for them to wait until March for a final decision and have that decision dependent on the voters. The HCA is too rigid to consider alternatives to a non-refundable deposit. Yeah. So we restructured the offer to include a non-refundable deposit of $20,000 and that we're waiting to hear. They did have interest from a childcare company. But it seems that we have more interest.
And by offering that non-refundable deposit, does that mean that they will pay us taxes?
You're right.
Okay, so it's gonna be a wash.
It's gonna be.
Okay.
Now, is there an inspection been done on the building?
There's no, and that's one of the things that, like any real estate transaction, right? You get under agreement and then you do your due diligence and there's opportunities to say, well, we found this from. The architect and the construction manager and subcontractors have all been through the building to develop this budget. So we're not looking at a lemon.
And Connor and trustees and others have been through the building as well. As far as the warrant article value, we don't have that for you yet, and it'll become clearer as to why. The loss of tax revenue, that information Connor provided. About 24,000 a year, but it's only been owned by HCA maybe 4 years, something like that. So before that, it was a pilot.
And they were not subject to taxation as a nonprofit.
Yeah. We've talked about the intentions for the existing library. And the land as far also would go for recreational use and park activities. No, as you've seen already in the budget, there are no expenses related to this project in the 2024. If we're successful, construction would start on the building there in fall of next year, because as soon as the warrant article passes, then we move into the detailed design phase, and then they do their bidding out the work. So it would start by the fall. Cash values, okay. I took that information from the October 1 Library Foundation budget. See those numbers there. In addition, the Library Foundation has applied for a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. This is the last year NEH is doing infrastructure construction grants for buildings like libraries. 2 libraries in the region received grants. So not this year, but prior years, I think in Boston and Kittery, Maine. They have various matching requirements. So the foundation applied for an $800,000 grant. That requires, it's a 1-to-4 match. So we would have to match with new dollars, not this 300,000 that came in before last year, 3.2 million. We're at a position where if we get notified that the foundation has been selected for one of these grants, we'll get that notice in December. If they have, we have to go back to them and say, well, we've made some changes in the plans. We're not going to be doing a $3.2 million bond. It's going to be much lesser. So even if we're successful with that grant application, I think the money is more likely to be like 500,000, simply because the cost of the project will not support the 800,000 request. The foundation is also launching a new round of fundraising, so they hope to bring in several 100,000 more. See how that goes. Timeline, I've mentioned that already, fall, and would expect to open the new library by summer of 25. Which does open the possibility that if we do something with the rec and you needed more money, there's another year before the library moves out. So in some respects, the rec has an opportunity, if needed, to make a second pitch for more money. And by then you'd know if you got that $1 million grant, which was change the whole scope of things. Project Bond, Connor can speak to this. These are numbers that we got last summer.
Well, so these are the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank, which is very likely where we would send approved bonds to. They do sales in July and December, and so this is their rates from July of 2023, so just a few months ago. We'd probably be looking at a 20-year bond, so they got 3.65%.
Question, why is the 10-year significantly less? What's the deal? Is that
It is a crazy interest rate, a result of crazy interest rates.
okay?
It's the same reason that you can get a 6% CD for 13 months and 0% for 36 months.
Uncertainty.
That's changed,
exactly.
I understand. It's
Right.
changed, inversions changed. I expect them to be more similar.
One thing I've mentioned to Connor that some towns are pursuing is they do a bond for the majority of the project that they need. And then they get a bank loan, a local bank loan for an amount. So that, because that you can pay back quickly, or if you don't need it at all, you don't need it, like maybe the contingency amount or something like that. So I don't know, I know.
That would be after authorization. So voters just authorize the select board to borrow. The select board decides how to borrow. Most of it would likely be with the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank, but a portion of it could certainly be with the bank. The biggest detriment to the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank is there's no prepayment. So if you become flush with cash, you can't pay that off sooner because they're selling, their product is stability, right? Municipal bonds are tried and true, guaranteed. So that's one detriment, but a way around that would be not to bond the whole amount with the bond bank, get a loan for a portion.
So under the projected additional costs in future years, custodial, we currently have a part-time custodian at the library. You see the dollar amount there, it's 11 hours a week. We would probably need, if we hired a custodian, we might need someone more like 20 hours a week. But Connor found this cost per square foot as a measure, and that's where came up with that 23.4. That's just a sort of, I hate to say a plug number, but it's an estimate number. This would be an added facility, an added building in the town. I know that Liz consults with the facility manager on a pretty regular basis. To help, you know. And so that doesn't mean that you're gonna add 20% more of another person. It's just, that's an allocation of his time for the project.
We talked earlier about the growth in steps, right? So it's difficult sometimes to put a dollar amount to the added demand on positions that we might only have one of, and it's going to be years before we can justify having two of. That doesn't mean that there is no cost. It doesn't mean there's no added cost to having another facility that somebody's responsible for. It's just that we probably won't hire a second person just to be responsible for that. But if we were going to quantify based on current numbers, you know, earmark $20,000 a year, and, you know, maybe in 3 years we'll be asking for another person because we have other additional facilities. If you don't like that idea, we can look at it in other ways.
But isn't it true that when the school dumped us with their facilities manager, we hired a full-time person?
Right.
So we really had a lot more capacity than we had at school. And now we're talking about adding on to that. Is that true?
Adding on to the scope. Yeah, for an additional facility, right?
But this facilities manager would not be vacuuming, and obviously, it's more of a management level. Winter maintenance and grounds maintenance, we were relying on HCA, so I just listed what they have, but in talking with Connor, we would expect that the highway department would plow the yard, that it would be an additional cost, but again, at some rate with added roads, they'll someday need to add another plow driver. Grounds maintenance, as you know, if you've driven by the building, it's mature landscaping. The building is about 22 years old, something like that. We don't have plans to do any more than that. And the bloomers who helped our with us, the gardens, the current one, they're like, we're done. We can't take on any more garden. So we're going to keep it simple, not planning to add anything to that landscaping. So it's really a matter of mowing pretty much. And utility bills, I don't have information for you because I was pretty, I thought the information they gave was wild. 1 year would be $1,000 for electricity, the very next year, $7,000. Right, average this, what's going on?
I think that was I don't know what they do for buying electricity, but the rates went up from like 7 cents to like 22 cents. And so the rate in that time frame, and then they came down. Maybe they negotiated, maybe HCA negotiated a buying agreement. But if we can, once we get under agreement, we can ask them for just the kilowatt.
I think if we can get kilowatt hours, gallons of propane, then we can make a better estimate on that. Pavement, Mark has been very helpful in analyzing the status of the parking lot. And you can read that. His most recent email said that if we were to have them take up the parking lot, do whatever they do to rebuild the parking lot, I don't know if that's the right term, it would cost about $99,000. I think he came up with, there were two parts to it. It can't just be an overlay job because of the height of it, and it begins to interfere with, I guess, walkways or something, curbing and walkways. So his suggestion was if we did, ceiling, fill the cracks, repaint, that sort of thing, it would look nicer, and it would last for another 5 years at least. I mentioned it to the architect and he said, or 15 years, so my inclination would be not to replace the parking lot open at Connor and just do the patching ceiling.
What about accessibility? The way the parking lot is arranged versus the
accessibility to a medical facility is great. So you can enter in a wheelchair from the front. There's also ramp access in the back. So if that's your question, it's
now,
and it has
during COVID, what were the arrangements at the library here that you currently have? Drive up, drop things off and things like that.
What the library did was there's a window by the front door.
Right.
And somebody built, this is before your time, somebody built a little shed. It's still there, isn't it? Or is it?
Yeah, then
That's a little
Right over
like
there,
shed thing. And so it was a window thing, called from the parking lot, and they would have the materials ready and you came to the little window and got your stuff.
Now, that would not be feasible with this building.
Not that kind of a drive up, no. People would have to get out of their cars and probably come and get things out of the foyer.
You had to get out of the car anyway.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Walk
you
over
had,
this window. It wasn't a drive-through window.
that's right.
It was just come up, it was packaged for you by name.
Yeah, but everybody's old reading Christmas paper and stuff like that. But,
Pretty cool.
yeah. And, so anyway, that's my thought on pavement right now. And again, when we have a formal building, inspection done, that's when we'll find out more about that. Staffing, we don't anticipate any additional staffing, although what happens when any library expands, renovates, expands, new library, the utilization goes up dramatically. And so we'd have to see what is sustained on that. Liz had mentioned she could see possibly needing a part-time children's librarian to add to the staff if indeed we had that much additional use. The library most heavily use is by people with preschool children. Right?
Yeah.
And materials actually, we're in the process of trying to aggressively weed the collection. Because the space, that building is like 8,500 square feet. We have been planning a new building of 10,000 square feet. So it's, and the prior efforts were like 12, 13,000 square feet. So it's a smaller library, but audiobooks are not, the on disc audiobooks, people are really into the streaming of that stuff. So we're reducing the use. Amy, she's back there looking at what hasn't circulated in 5 years or something, and really making very critical.
So you're saying you'll have fewer than previous shelves?
I think we will have lower. I suppose the answer is maybe yes. Certainly not more. What we have now, if you've been in the library, inaccessible on the top shelf, inaccessible on the bottom shelf, sort of, we have stools to get up there. We shouldn't have such high shelving. It's not really safe.
Should we purchase this building? What's the possibility of expansion down
Yes.
the road? Is that the footprint and can that be done?
There's, I think there's a little flyer that has the floor plan, so you can see what the footprint looks like inside. There is some opportunity for limited expansion.
This is all one floor.
Yes.
Okay.
There's property back here and a little patio. That's also where the like air conditioning units are, and the septic is back there. So you can move your septic, I suppose. There's always ways to get around it. But I think if we were to do an expansion, we're talking more in those front sections here and here. There could be some limited expansion there. It's never going to turn into a 12,000 square foot library, but we're also you see that purple on the top is the conference meeting room. So it's larger than what we have now, but it's not huge, but it'll be adequate for most uses.
And there's a whole building generator.
Yes, that's over here. And it looks like it's big enough to generate power for about 3 buildings. It's this huge thing, but it's, been consistently tested. The HVAC system needs to be fully inspected. That is as old as the building, so it's approaching 23 years old. It appears to be, it looks fine. I know. That has not been examined when the construction people were there. They looked at it. We didn't have a HVAC. However, they are reaching out to the company that installed it, find out what has been done on maintenance and get more information from them. The other thing we looked at is the roof, which looks to be in good condition. Most of it is the original roof. There were 2 small additions to the building. Reach footage on this little piece bump out here was an addition in like 2007, and this piece here was an extension. This little end here, they added on to the building. So those have newer. The end that is sort of a pale melon color would be the children's wing. And that wing, the roof on that looks positioned well for solar. We wanted to put solar panels on the roof. I have reached out to Jack Bingham on the Energy Committee. He had volunteered initially, he did solar, to donate the labor to install it as a donation to the project. So I've asked him to take a look at that and see is it feasible to do solar? What would be the return on investment if we did solar? Sort of cost that out, see if it's worth doing. When we did some community input sessions on this, people really were interested in solar and sustainability and that sort of thing. So we had been looking at a new building that would maybe be totally solar panels on the roof and be actually even net zero. But this building doesn't lend itself position and trees and stuff like that, but that area did. So that's.
You mentioned too, that you said that the 3 HVAC systems probably can be replaced one at a time if needed.
That's right. Yeah, they showed us a picture of it. He said, I was nervous because when you look at the budget, now turning to this form. The top well, we plugged in the number of 1.1 million as the asking price, so it would be more than that. We didn't include any closing costs, but those would be limited for a minimum. You see the architecture, which is apparently figured as a percentage of the construction, and an owner contingency of 250,000, which is somewhat modest, I guess, for this size project, but renovation is less expensive than the building new. Under building construction, that, I did ask how much. I think they said they had, what, $30,000 in the budget for any pavement, adjustments, that sort of thing. There's information about testing, inspections that are needed. I asked them to separately price out what would it cost if we chose to replace the roof, reshingle. What would it cost to replace the entire HVAC system? So, and that number you see is 300,000. So I've talked to Connor about that because I have, high anxiety, particularly about what happens if 2 years in, suddenly the system dies. And then what are we going to do? How do we have money on hand? The architect and the builder said that the system is unlikely, very unlikely, the whole thing would crash. It's that one component might need to be fixed or replaced and another component. It has led me, this is sort of in line with a prior discussion you had, that roof replacement and HVAC replacement and possibly ultimately paper replacement are things that we should build a capital reserve for the library so that when those things go, we have money set aside to do that. And I thought maybe we needed to have all that at the beginning, a whole big pot. And I'm now converted and comfortable that putting in, $50,000 a year is going to get us there and we'll be fine. Then the furniture, fixtures, and equipment are just sort of estimates based on the architect's experience with other libraries. And that brought us to that 3.7 number at the bottom. So if you take off the 300,000 and the 83,000 from that number, brings it down to what we would be looking for, I think, to cover the project. And then on top of that, we know $100,000 in cash from the foundation. So that brings it down further. But in other words, we're bringing it down to almost 3 million. If there's more fundraising between now and deliberative session, it goes into the pot and we can reduce that further. I'd love to see this number, and if we get that grant, it'll be down further. So we won't have a final number on what the warrant is going to be really until probably at least January for the public hearing.
As a final number.
And a final, I suppose we could still amend it downwards by, February. Because then at least anything that's in hand in cash. We have, as you saw, we have pledges in addition to that. And if we get this grant, there's very specific wording by the NEH as to what kind of wording has to be in the bond article to qualify for match for that. So that's where we are.
Major change from where we were.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, I'm gathering since you are dealing with HCA, they wouldn't offer the lease because they hate headaches. They're brick and mortar, acute care, that's it.
Yeah. They're divesting, plain and simple.
This is one of 6 buildings they're selling.
Yeah. It's on the sale over there. That's their focus. Yep.
You're working on the Medicare fraud plans. As they have in the past.
That's HCA.
So I don't know that I have anything further to offer on, we've talked, Connor and I talked a little bit. My worry about putting everything in one warrant article had been, is the number going to, if people say, I don't know that I want to fund that rec expansion or that particular amount, would they vote no on the entire article and kill the library?
Well, they can't claim that this is a Taj Mahal. They can't claim that this is a Taj Mahal.
No, and they know what it looks like. People were,
Yeah.
I think Connor was forwarding me some emails you were getting from what, the Ask Us column?
Right,
Just
past
saying-
Barrington, right?
Yeah, that just said, that building would be a great library, you know, things like that. And a person I know who voted against the other proposal said she would vote for that. So, you know, I think also that you don't have to imagine what it looks like, you know what it looks like. I think that is helpful. The upside of combining them into one warrant article is that the rec has a huge constituency. And, you know, I don't know if that brings more people to the table. I just don't know what the risks are. I wish I had a crystal ball on that.
I've been disappointed over the years that they haven't been more supportive.
I have been as well, because anytime the library moved out, they were gonna benefit.
Yeah.
But prior, I think prior rec commissioners and maybe prior directors were more reticent about seeming to support another department. I don't know.
Just not correct.
We work very well with Jesse. I know Liz and Jesse been working on a team,
Yeah, we should tackle them.
but you know, something about bringing high school kids using the van up to the rec and you know, the library, working together on joint programming, things like that. So,
I think the biggest benefit we have here, and Mr. Shepherd mentioned it earlier, is if we can demonstrate the vision that the rising tide lifts all boats, and that if the library passes, not only do we have a wonderful new library that addresses needs that can't be met currently, but we have vacated space that can be used by the rec department and developed into community center space with, you know, space available for everybody. That vision, demonstrating that vision, if we can successfully demonstrate that to residents, I don't think it matters whether it's one article, two articles, three articles. It's, you know, that's what we have to describe, I guess.
and I think if it were two articles, it would need to be clear that the rec passes only if it's just a renovation of the space, that the rec can pass only if the library can pass, because the library has to move out in order for the.
Right,
it's a dependency, So it's a dependency.
Yeah, and I think that's where the outcome and scope helps, because, you know, like that addition into the parking lot, right? So it could be that and one of the reasons that that's so important, we just had an energy audit performed on 105 Ramsdale Lane, and the biggest energy issues are in the old ambulance bay. Imagine something that was built as a garage and now is finished space has energy problems. Weird. Yeah, and that exterior wall of the gym. And so one of the big benefits of doing an addition there is we could fix that wall. But anyways, point being, if the library doesn't leave and the voters approve money to make improvements and we don't get a grant, we could go out there and fix that wall. We also, because the food pantry's there's money available if a project benefits more than 51% of low or moderately low income people. There is actually a tremendous amount of funding sources available. They're not all guaranteed. Some energy projects, the utility companies are required to put money into a pot to fund projects for low and moderately low income constituents. Well, the food pantry qualifies as that. And so that's an additional funding source, which we're pursuing it as a result of the energy audit, to say, okay, if we do work down here, renovation, addition of any kind, how can we integrate these projects into that and have them fully funded? Community development block grant is another funding source that if we made any improvements to the food pantry or that included the food pantry, everything associated with the food pantry could be funded 100% by grant funds. Now, community development block grant is very competitive, and so it's unlikely, although the city of Concord is getting a new food pantry as, you know, through that funding program. But it's worth trying, you know, it's worth pursuing those additional funding sources. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say also the foundation, they've been doing this fundraising and grant searching. And I think last time around, or maybe 2 times ago, they got a grant of $25,000 from the McKinnich Foundation, but it was only good if the bond passed. Since the bond failed, Obviously, we didn't get it, so he expects to go back to them again for an amount of money. He's also, he being Roger Gingrich, the chair, has also researched, I'm gonna say, Eversource, I think, and EBSCO, you mentioned energy. I think EBSCO funds solar projects, and I don't know what Eversource does, but, you know, he had his finger on a couple others, so he's thinking if we're successful, and if all these grants were successful, there's another 100,000 that could come in.
Partners with it and supports the solar
Yes.
field.
Oh, yeah.
As long as they pay.
What is the chance we'll get the grant for the rec center?
Slim. We have a very, okay, here's a couple promising things. I will say it's slim because they expect over 50 applications and they expect to award 6 or 7 projects. They made money available for technical assistance, so micro grants of $2,500 for grant writing. And for the community center investment program, we applied for that. They awarded it to us. That's a promising concept that they think our idea has merit and they're willing to invest in a competitive application for. That's promising. What were the idea of bringing people together, having the food pantry there, making space available for anybody and everybody to come and be a part of a community? That's exactly what this grant program exists for. And so we have a very competitive application. There will be other very competitive applications. They're going to look regionally to see that, to try to spread the money out. So the town of Exeter got money to renovate a building into a senior center in the last round. And so is Exeter too close? Are they, you know, where are these other projects going to be? So we're going after it strong, but it's, you know.
And on the library, big grant, NEH grant, last year they funded 27% of the applicants. So it's like a 1 in 4 chance, which is not bad for a national grant if it stays the same this year. But it's not certain that it's right.
If you combine these two concepts, does it make the idea of a grant more attractive to people awarding the money? Because you're now both contributing to a bigger goal of a community.
Well, they're different funding sources entirely.
Sure, they are.
So I don't know that they compare. How
Definitely for the community center investment program, they're looking for partnerships, concrete partnerships within the community. And so we just had our pre-application meeting yesterday. And they gave us some specifics of what they're looking for in partnerships. They said, letter of intent, we put those in the shredder. We don't care about your letter of intent. We want a memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding saying, this community group will meet here, they'll meet here 3 times a month and, you know, whatever. So like for the library, to your point about the vision and how does that partnership work? I envision that pretty soon Jesse will be getting in touch with Susan or Liz to say, let's draw up a memorandum of understanding for this community space that says that the library has, you know, access to program in this community space, you know, free of charge and for residents of Barrington and to do whatever programs they want. And the library says, we intend to provide, you know, 5 programs a month in this space because it's space bigger than what we have available. So that it makes the grant application much more competitive.
We actually did have the same sort of thing in the NEH grant, where they were getting letters of support from the historical society. You know, it's all about humanities and that sort of stuff. So they got letters of support from various places like that. And one of the things that's one of the rooms included in the new library is the Barrington room. So the historical documents that we have been storing or making available because the historical society doesn't have that capacity. So hopefully there's enough there to fight them.
Very exciting.
It is not as exciting as a beach, but you know.
Okay.
But it's a vision.
In those grant applications, you don't have to specify what the events are.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Well. For programs that the recreation